Have you ever found yourself pondering the reason God selected Saul to be Israel's very first king, only to watch him fail in such a devastating way? Or maybe you find yourself intrigued by the complicated relationship he shared with David. Tonight, while you settle into bed and rest your head upon your pillow, I'm going to walk you through each and every chapter of Saul's remarkable life. The triumphant moments, the errors in judgment, the spiritual teachings, and the final price paid for pride and refusal to obey. But before we get started, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really does help tremendously. Also, we'd love for you to let us know your location and the current time where you are. We truly enjoy hearing from you. So, with no more delay, shall we begin? Many generations ago, before royal rulers governed the territory of Israel, the inhabitants lived through difficult and challenging periods. These were known as the days of the judges. Men and women selected by God to provide leadership during times of crisis. The territory lay nestled between the Great Sea on its western border and the Jordan River marking its eastern edge. A stunning land filled with hills, valleys, and rich, fertile plains. During those times, there was no single leader guiding the 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe primarily stayed within its own boundaries, joining forces only when confronted with common threats. Without a centralized ruler in place, the people frequently strayed from the traditions of those who came before them. They would lose sight of the God who had delivered them from Egyptian bondage and led them into this land of promise. The pattern repeated itself across many passing years. The people would turn their backs on God's appointed path. Before long, trouble would arrive as neighboring kingdoms exploited their vulnerability. During their times of suffering, the Israelites would cry out desperately for divine intervention. God would then raise up a judge, a leader meant to bring them salvation. Peace would settle over the land temporarily until the cycle started all over again. Hostile forces pressed against Israel from every direction. The fierce Philistines maintained control over the coastal territories with their iron weaponry and expertly trained warriors. The Ammonites posed threats from the eastern regions, while raiders from the southern deserts frequently swept through to plunder crops and steal livestock. With each assault, families were left without their homes, their harvests destroyed, and sometimes their very lives taken. Villages existed in isolation, receiving minimal assistance from fellow Israelites dwelling in distant regions. A man belonging to the tribe of Dan might sense little kinship with his far-off relatives living in Judah. This absence of unity rendered the people vulnerable against well-organized enemies who advanced with singular determination. Throughout those uncertain times, most people did whatever appeared right according to their own judgment. Some settlements continued to honor the traditional ways and maintained the sacred laws. Others blended foreign practices with their own customs, establishing shrines upon hilltops where they burned incense to deities fashioned from stone and wood. Family disagreements occasionally escalated into blood feuds, stretching across generations. Those who traveled feared the open pathways where bandits waited in hiding. Farmers lived in constant worry, each growing season, wondering if raiders might steal everything they'd worked to grow. Merchants struggled to conduct trade between regions where no shared rules existed. The land that had been promised as a divine blessing now appeared overflowing with conflict. The tabernacle, representing God's dwelling among the people, remained standing at Shiloh. Within this place, the priests maintained custody of the sacred Ark of the Covenant, containing its ancient stone tablets. However, many Israelites seldom visited this holy location, neglecting the festivals and offerings their grandparents had faithfully maintained. As darkness expanded across the territory, numerous elders gazed backward toward the days of Moses and Joshua with deep yearning. They recalled the stories describing how God had divided the sea, supplied food throughout the wilderness, and assisted them in claiming this land as their inheritance. Now they questioned whether those days of magnificence had vanished forever. Yet through all the disorder and uncertainty, a faithful remnant persisted. In quiet households throughout the land, parents continued teaching their children the ancient narratives. They recounted Abraham's calling, Joseph's dreams, and Moses guiding the people toward freedom. They whispered prayers into the darkness that God would remember his covenant promises and restore light to Israel. The foundation was now laid for transformation. The era of the judges was drawing toward its conclusion. A fresh chapter in Israel's narrative was on the verge of beginning, one that would reshape the nation for all time. The rise of Samuel. How the prophet Samuel becomes the final judge of Israel. Within the hill country of Ephraim resided a man named Elkanah, who had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. While Peninnah had borne children, Hannah's arms remained tragically empty year after year. Her heart ached with intense longing for a child she could call her own. Each year, Elkanah brought his family to Shiloh for worship at the tabernacle. There, the elderly priest Eli oversaw the sacred shrine. His own sons functioned as priests, yet they cared little for holy matters. They claimed the choicest portions of sacrifices for their own benefit and handled God's altar with disrespect. During one particular year at Shiloh, Hannah prayed with such profound emotion that her lips moved silently without producing sound. Eli observed her and assumed she was intoxicated, so he scolded her harshly. "I'm not drunk, my lord," she explained through flowing tears. "I'm pouring out my very soul to God." She had made a solemn vow. If God granted her a son, she would dedicate him back to serve the Lord throughout all his days. God listened to Hannah's prayer. Months afterward, she cradled a baby boy in her arms and named him Samuel, meaning heard by God. For 3 years, she nursed him and observed him growing. Then, remaining true to her promise, she brought Samuel to Eli at Shiloh. "I am the woman who stood in this very spot praying," she reminded the aged priest. "For this child I prayed earnestly, and the Lord has granted my petition. Now I dedicate him to the Lord, for as long as he lives, he belongs to God." Then Hannah departed, leaving her small son behind, returning home with emotions blending sadness and joy together. Samuel matured in the shadow of the tabernacle, absorbing the ways of worship. He assisted Eli, whose eyes were growing increasingly dim with advancing age. The boy wore a small linen ephod, a special garment designated for those serving in holy places. Each year his mother brought him a freshly made robe when she arrived to offer sacrifices. While Samuel grew in both wisdom and physical stature, Eli's sons persisted in their wicked ways. They exploited women who served at the tabernacle entrance and handled offerings with utter contempt. Eli spoke words of warning toward his sons, yet his rebukes lacked strength and produced no change whatsoever. One night, while Samuel lay down to sleep in proximity to the ark of God, he heard a voice calling out his name. Believing it was Eli, he rushed to the old priest. "I didn't call for you," Eli responded, sending him back to his bed. When this occurred a third time, Eli understood that God was speaking directly to the boy. "Go lie down," he instructed Samuel. "If the voice calls once more, respond by saying, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" Samuel returned to his sleeping mat, and before long the voice came again. The message God delivered to him was not an easy one to hear. Judgment would descend upon Eli's household because he had failed to restrain his sons properly. When morning arrived, Samuel feared, revealing to Eli what he had heard. But when the old priest insisted on hearing absolutely everything, Samuel withheld nothing. Eli accepted the difficult news with quiet resignation. "He is the Lord. Let him do whatever seems good in his sight." From that day forward, Samuel became recognized throughout Israel as a prophet of God. When he spoke, people paid attention because his words consistently proved accurate. Unlike the corrupt leadership displayed by Eli's sons, Samuel conducted himself with integrity. As Samuel matured into manhood, danger was brewing along Israel's borders. The Philistines, equipped with their iron weapons and trained soldiers, applied greater pressure against the tribal territories. In a desperate battle, Israel's army brought the Ark of the Covenant into combat, hoping its presence would secure victory. Instead, catastrophe struck. The Ark was captured by the enemy. Eli's sons were killed in battle. And when Eli received the devastating news, he fell backward from his seat and died. The glory had departed from Israel, and darkness appeared to blanket the land. For 7 months, the ark moved through various Philistine cities, bringing plagues wherever it traveled. Eventually, the Philistines returned it to Israel. Samuel gathered the people together at Mizpah to turn back toward God with their whole hearts. When they assembled, the Philistines launched an attack, but this time God brought victory through thunder descending from heaven. Samuel traveled in a circuit through Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, judging legal cases and teaching God's ways. Under his wise guidance, peace returned throughout the land. For many years, he led Israel with wisdom and fairness, becoming the final and greatest of the judges. Yet, Samuel could not lead indefinitely. As his hair turned gray and his steps became slower, the people began questioning what would happen after he was gone. Would the cycle of chaos make its return? The time was approaching when Israel would request something they had never possessed before, a king to lead them into warfare. The demand for a king. The elders of Israel demand a king. As Samuel's beard grew white with the passage of years, he appointed his sons Joel and Abijah as judges in Beersheba. He hoped they would follow his example of justice and mercy. But unlike their father, these young men turned aside in pursuit of dishonest gain. They accepted bribes freely and twisted judgments to favor whoever paid the highest amount. Word of their corruption spread rapidly throughout the tribes. Elders whispered concerns while sitting in village gates. Merchants complained when forced to pay extra simply to receive fair treatment. The people began fearing that everything Samuel had built would crumble into ruins when he died. One warm spring day, the elders representing all the tribes gathered at Ramah, where Samuel lived. They arrived with dust covering their sandals from lengthy journeys, determination burning in their eyes, and a request that would transform Israel forever. "You are old," they told Samuel directly, "and your sons do not follow in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to lead us, like all the other nations possess." Their words stung Samuel's heart deeply. For years he had journeyed from town to town, settling disputes and teaching God's law. Now they were rejecting not merely his sons, but his entire life's work. Samuel withdrew into prayer, his spirit deeply troubled by their demand. In the stillness of prayer, God spoke to him. "Listen to everything the people are saying to you. They have not rejected you. They have rejected me as their king, just as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this very day. They have forsaken me and served other gods." God instructed Samuel to warn the people about what having a king would mean for their everyday lives. A king would conscript their sons for his army and their daughters for his royal household. He would claim the finest fields and vineyards for himself and his officials. He would demand 1/10 of their grain and grapes. In time, the people would cry out in distress because of the king they had chosen. Samuel returned to the elders and shared this warning, painting a vivid picture of the burdens kingship would impose. But the elders remained firm in their position. "No," they said, "we desire a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." Their eyes turned toward the surrounding lands. Egypt with its Pharaoh, to Philistia with its lords, to Moab and Ammon with their kings. These nations appeared strong and united under single rulers who led their armies from the front lines. The Israelites longed deeply for such visible strength. Behind their request lay deeper fears taking root. Philistine armies continued threatening from the west. Ammonite raiders struck from the eastern regions. The tribes remained divided, hesitant to help each other during times of danger. A king, they believed, would unite them and bring the security they desperately craved. Samuel listened once more to their demands and brought their words back to God through prayer. The answer came clearly: listen to them and give them a king. The time of the judges was ending. A new age was about to dawn. Samuel sent the elders home to their respective tribes. Go back to your towns, he instructed them. God has heard your request and will provide you with a king. As they walked away, Samuel stood watching, wondering what kind of ruler God would select for this stubborn yet beloved people. Across Israel, word spread with remarkable speed. Soon they would have a king just like the nations surrounding them. Some celebrated enthusiastically, imagining glory and power. Others worried about Samuel's warnings of heavy taxation and lost freedoms. Everyone wondered who this king would be and how God would make him known. In villages and farms, people began to speculate endlessly. Would their king come from Judah, the tribe Jacob had blessed for leadership, or from Ephraim, which had grown powerful in the central hills? Perhaps from Benjamin, small yet fierce in battle? No one knew with certainty, but all waited with mounting excitement. Samuel alone fully understood what this meant. For centuries, Israel had been unique among nations, a people with God as their king. Now, they would join the pattern of the world around them. Their request marked not just a change in leadership structure, but a turning away from their special calling. Yet even as one chapter closed, Samuel trusted God to write the next one. If Israel must have a human king, God would choose someone who could lead with justice. The prophet began preparing himself for the task ahead, finding and anointing the man who would wear Israel's crown. The search for a king, the divine selection process. While elders debated endlessly and people wondered who might become king, God was already working in hidden ways. The choice would not come from human wisdom or popular voting. The Lord had been preparing a king long before Israel made their request. Samuel waited patiently for divine guidance. In prayer each morning and evening, he asked God to reveal the chosen one. Show me the man you have selected, he prayed earnestly. Give me eyes to see him as you see him. God's answer came one quiet day. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. With this word treasured in his heart, Samuel went about his normal duties. He prepared for a sacrifice at a nearby town, knowing God's timing would bring the right man across his path. Unlike human searches, with their careful plans and lists of qualifications, this selection rested entirely in God's hands. The divine criteria for Israel's first king remained a mystery. Would God choose based on strength, wisdom, piety, skill in battle? The answer would soon become clear, though not in ways anyone expected. In those days, the standards for leadership differed greatly from our own. People looked at outward qualities, height, strength, physical appearance. God had warned Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected these measurements." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Throughout Israel, many young men might have seemed worthy of the crown. Sons of wealthy landowners who knew how to manage estates, battle-hardened warriors who had fought Philistines, learned men who knew the law of Moses. Any might have made a sensible choice. Yet God often works through the unexpected. From Noah building an ark before rain had ever fallen, to Moses raised in Pharaoh's house, to Gideon threshing wheat in a winepress. God's choices surprise human wisdom. So it would be with Israel's first king. The signs Samuel received seemed ordinary enough. The chosen man would arrive at a specific time. He would come from the tribe of Benjamin, one of the smallest tribes, nearly wiped out in a civil war just one generation earlier. This humble beginning would remind Israel that their king's authority came from God, not from human power or prestige. Samuel prepared the sacrificial meal and invited 30 local leaders. As they waited for the feast to begin, he wondered which face in the crowd might be the future king. But God had not yet sent the promised visitor from Benjamin. Across the hills, far from Samuel's thoughts, a simple errand was unfolding that would change Israel's history forever. Lost donkeys would lead to a found kingdom. A son's duty to his father would place him in line for a throne. The ordinary was about to become extraordinary through God's unseen hand. As Israel waited for news of their future king, daily life continued its normal rhythm. Farmers tended their fields, shepherds watched over flocks, merchants traded their goods. None knew that the next ruler walked among them, unknown even to himself. The stage was set for a meeting that would reshape the nation forever. Samuel's heart likely held conflicting feelings during this time. He had warned against kingship, yet now prepared to anoint the very ruler he had cautioned about. This tension between divine permission and divine preference would mark Israel's monarchy from its very beginning. The prophet readied himself for the sacred task ahead. He prepared the special anointing oil, made from olive oil mixed with fragrant spices, according to an ancient formula. This oil had been used to consecrate priests and sacred objects. Now, for the first time, it would be poured upon the head of a king. Saul's introduction. A humble beginning. In the territory of Benjamin lived a man named Kish, well-respected and prosperous. Among his possessions was a son named Saul, a young man who stood head and shoulders above his peers. Tall and handsome, he caught attention wherever he went, yet his heart remained humble despite his striking appearance. Saul spent his days helping with his father's lands and herds. He knew the rhythm of planting and harvest, the smell of earth turned by the plow, the weight of water jars brought from the village well. His was a simple life, far removed from thoughts of thrones or kingdoms. One morning, Kish discovered some donkeys had wandered away from his fields. These animals represented valuable property, used for carrying loads, grinding grain, and working small plots of land. Their loss would be felt keenly by the household. "Take one of the servants with you," Kish told his son, "and go search for the donkeys." Saul nodded and prepared for the search. He filled a small bag with bread and water, checked his sandals for wear, and called for a trusted servant to join him. Their journey took them through the hill country of Ephraim and the region of Shalisha, but they found no trace of the missing animals. They traveled through Shaalim and the land of Benjamin, asking in each village if anyone had seen stray donkeys. Each time, the answer was identical. No one had seen them. When they reached the district of Zuph, Saul grew concerned about his father. "We've been gone too long," he told his servant. "My father will stop worrying about the donkeys and start worrying about us." The servant offered an unexpected suggestion. "Look, in this town, there's a man of God, a prophet. People respect him greatly because everything he says comes true. Maybe he can tell us which way to go." Saul hesitated. "If we go, what can we give him? The food in our bags is gone. We have no gift for the man of God. What do we have?" Searching through his clothing, the servant found a small silver coin. "I have this," he said. "We can give it to the man of God to tell us our way." In earlier times in Israel, people called prophets seers because they could see what others couldn't. When someone wanted divine guidance, they would say, "Come, let's go to the seer." Saul knew little of such spiritual matters, but agreed to seek out this man of God. As they climbed toward the town where Samuel was staying, they met young women coming to draw water from the spring outside the settlement. "Is the seer here?" Saul asked them. "Yes," they replied. "He came today because the people are having a sacrifice at the high place. If you hurry, you'll catch him before he goes up to eat. The people won't begin until he comes to bless the sacrifice." Saul and his servant hurried into town. Near the gate, they met an older man walking toward them. Neither knew they stood in the presence of Samuel, Israel's prophet and judge. And Samuel had no way of recognizing this tall young man except through divine guidance. Yet, at that very moment, God spoke to Samuel's heart. "This is the man I told you about. He will govern my people." Saul approached Samuel and asked simply, "Can you please tell me where the seer's house is?" "I am the seer," Samuel replied with a knowing smile. "Go up ahead of me to the high place, for today you will eat with me. In the morning I'll tell you all that's in your heart. As for the donkeys you lost 3 days ago, don't worry about them. They've been found. And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and your father's whole family?" Confusion crossed Saul's face. "Why would you say such a thing to me? I'm from Benjamin, the smallest tribe in Israel, and my clan is the least important in the tribe. Why do you speak to me this way?" Samuel didn't explain further, but led Saul and his servant to the feast. He seated Saul in the place of honor among the 30 invited guests and instructed the cook to bring the special portion of meat that had been set aside. "Here is what has been kept for you," Samuel told Saul, as the choice portion was placed before him. "Eat it, because it was set aside for you for this occasion." That day Saul ate with Samuel, not yet understanding that the missing donkeys had led him to a destiny beyond anything he could imagine. His journey to find what was lost would end with him being found by God for a purpose far greater than he knew. The anointing. Samuel anoints Saul in secret. After the feast, Samuel brought Saul and his servant back to his house. He prepared a sleeping place for them on the flat roof, a common guest area in homes of that time. As stars spread across the night sky, Saul likely wondered about the strange welcome he had received and the cryptic words spoken to him. Morning came with golden light spilling across the hillsides. "Get ready," Samuel told Saul. "I will send you on your way soon." As they walked to the edge of town together, Samuel sent the servant ahead, then turned to Saul with words that would change everything. "Stay here a while, so I can give you a message from God." What happened next took only moments, but would shape Israel's future for generations. Samuel reached for a small flask of olive oil he had brought with him. In ancient times, oil symbolized God's spirit and blessing. It had been used to consecrate priests and sacred objects in the tabernacle. Now it would mark Israel's first king. With solemn movements, Samuel poured the fragrant oil over Saul's head. The liquid ran down his hair and beard, a visible sign of an invisible calling. Then Samuel kissed Saul, a sign of respect and loyalty, and spoke the words that must have stunned the young Benjamite. "Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance?" In that quiet moment on a hillside, with no crowd watching and no trumpets blaring, Israel's monarchy began. The simplicity of the scene stood in stark contrast to the weight of its meaning. God had chosen Saul, and through this simple ritual, Samuel confirmed the divine selection. To assure Saul this was truly God's will and not just an old man's fancy, Samuel gave him 3 signs that would happen on his journey home. "When you leave me today, you will meet 2 men near Rachel's tomb. They will say to you, 'The donkeys you were looking for have been found, and now your father is worried about you.' Then you will go on until you reach the great tree at Tabor. 3 men going up to worship God at Bethel will meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, another 3 loaves of bread, and another a skin of wine. They will greet you and offer you 2 loaves of bread, which you should accept. After that, you will go to Gibeah of God, where there is a Philistine outpost. As you approach the town, you will meet a procession of prophets coming down from the high place. They will be playing musical instruments and prophesying. The Spirit of the Lord will come powerfully upon you, and you will prophesy with them and be changed into a different person." Samuel concluded with instructions. "Once these signs take place, do whatever your hand finds to do, for God is with you. Go down ahead of me to Gilgal. I will surely come down to you to sacrifice burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, but you must wait 7 days until I come to you and tell you what you are to do." As Saul turned to leave, questions must have swirled through his mind. Why him? What would this mean for his quiet life in his father's house? How could he, a simple farmer, lead a nation? Yet with each step away from Samuel, he drew closer to his new calling. Just as Samuel had foretold, Saul met two men who told him the donkeys were found, and his father now worried for him. Later, he encountered the three men headed to Bethel, who offered him bread. Each sign confirmed that Samuel's words came from God, not merely human wisdom. When Saul reached Gibeah, he met the procession of prophets. As they approached with their tambourines, flutes, and harps, something remarkable happened. The Spirit of God came powerfully upon Saul, and he began to prophesy among them. People who knew him were amazed at the transformation. "What is this that has happened to the son of Kish?" they asked one another. "Is Saul also among the prophets?" The question became a saying in Israel, used whenever someone showed unexpected spiritual insight. When Saul finished prophesying, he went to the high place to worship. Later, when his uncle asked where he had been, Saul mentioned looking for the donkeys and meeting Samuel. But when asked what Samuel had told him, Saul said only that the prophet had assured him the donkeys were found. About the matter of the kingdom and his anointing, he said nothing. The oil had dried on Saul's head, but its significance remained. Unknown to all but Samuel and himself, the tall son of Kish now carried a sacred calling. The shepherd of his father's donkeys would soon become the shepherd of a nation. But first, God would confirm before all Israel what had been done in secret. The public coronation, Saul's official selection as king. The time had come for all Israel to know who would be their king. Samuel called the people to gather at Mizpah, a place of spiritual significance where they had found victory over the Philistines years before. From all corners of the land, elders and families traveled to witness this historic moment. As the crowd grew, anticipation filled the air. Who would be chosen? Which tribe would produce Israel's first king? Would he be a warrior, a landowner, a learned man of the law? Everyone had their guess, their hope, their preference. Samuel stood before the assembled tribes. His voice carried across the gathering as he delivered God's message. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel up out of Egypt, and I delivered you from the power of Egypt and all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But today you have rejected your God who saves you out of all your disasters and calamities, and you have said, 'No, appoint a king over us.'" The prophet's words reminded them that this request came from them, not from God. Still, the Lord would grant their wish. "Now then," Samuel continued, "present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans." Samuel began the selection process. A sacred lottery that the Israelites believed revealed God's will. First, he had the tribes come forward. When the tribe of Benjamin was taken, murmurs spread through the crowd. Benjamin, the smallest tribe. Not powerful Judah or numerous Ephraim. Next came the clans of Benjamin. The clan of Matri was chosen. Then the families of that clan, until finally Saul, son of Kish, was selected. The divine lot had fallen just where Samuel knew it would, confirming before all the people what had been done in private days before. But when they looked for Saul, he was nowhere to be found. The tall young man who towered over his peers had disappeared. After searching everywhere, someone thought to ask the Lord directly, "Has the man come here yet?" The Lord answered, "Yes, he has hidden himself among the baggage." They ran and brought him out from his hiding place among the supplies and equipment the travelers had brought. As Saul stood among the people, his height was unmistakable. From his shoulders upward, he stood taller than any other Israelite. Here was a king who looked the part, whose very stature seemed to confirm his selection. Samuel spoke to the crowd. "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." The people shouted with one voice, "Long live the king!" Samuel then explained the rights and duties of kingship. He wrote these on a scroll and placed it before the Lord in the tabernacle, a constitution of sorts for this new form of government. The sacred text outlined the proper limits of royal power and the king's obligations to God and people. With the ceremony complete, Samuel sent everyone home. Saul also returned to his house in Gibeah, accompanied by valiant men whose hearts God had touched. These would form the beginning of his royal guard and counselors. Yet not everyone celebrated the selection. Some troublemakers said, "How can this man save us?" They despised him and brought him no gifts. The seeds of division appeared even on this first day of Saul's public recognition. Saul kept silent about these insults, neither defending himself nor seeking revenge. Perhaps he himself still struggled to accept his new role. The young man who had hidden among the baggage now carried the weight of a nation's hopes. How would he transform from a farmer's son to Israel's leader? For the moment, Saul returned to his fields and his familiar life. There was no palace waiting for him, no royal court established. The transition from judge to king would happen gradually, as circumstances demanded. God would provide the opportunity for Saul to prove himself as king indeed, not just in title. Samuel watched these events unfold with mixed feelings. He had warned against kingship, but now had overseen the installation of Israel's first monarch. Would Saul prove worthy of the sacred oil that had been poured on his head? Would he lead with justice and remain faithful to God? Only time would tell. But the die was cast, the selection made. Israel had their king, standing tall among them. Now they would learn what it meant to be a kingdom. Saul's first test. The Ammonite threat against Jabesh-Gilead. About a month later, events to the east drew Israel's attention. Nahash, the Ammonite, marched with his army against Jabesh-Gilead, a town east of the Jordan River. The Ammonites had long been enemies of Israel, claiming lands that had been settled by the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. When Nahash surrounded Jabesh-Gilead, the town elders sought terms of surrender. "Make a treaty with us," they begged, "and we will serve you." Their hope was for mercy, to become tributaries rather than face destruction. Nahash responded with cruel terms. "I will make a treaty with you only on this condition, that I gouge out the right eye of every one of you. This will bring disgrace on all Israel." The demand was calculated to inflict both physical pain and lasting shame. Without a right eye, men would be less effective in battle, as warriors typically held shields on their left side, covering their left eye when fighting. More than that, the disfigurement would stand as a permanent visible reminder of their defeat. The elders asked for 7 days to send messengers throughout Israel. If no help came, they would accept the harsh terms. Nahash, confident in his strength and doubting Israel's unity, granted their request. Messengers raced across the Jordan and throughout the tribal territories. When they reached Gibeah, Saul's hometown, they shared the desperate news. The townspeople broke into loud weeping at the plight of their fellow Israelites. Saul was returning from his fields behind his oxen when he heard the commotion. "What's wrong with everyone? Why are they crying?" he asked. When told about the threat to Jabesh-Gilead, something awakened within him. The spirit that had come upon him at his anointing stirred again. Righteous anger filled Saul's heart. He took his oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent the pieces by messengers throughout Israel with this warning: "This is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel." The graphic message carried unmistakable urgency. This was not a diplomatic request, but a call to immediate action. The pieces of oxen represented both the emergency and the consequence of ignoring the call. This was how Saul, still living as a farmer but now thinking as a king, rallied his first army. The Lord moved powerfully, filling the people with fear and unity of purpose. They came out together as one person. When Saul counted them at Bezek, there were 300,000 from Israel and 30,000 from Judah, a vast army gathered in days. Saul sent word back to the messengers from Jabesh-Gilead: "By the time the sun is hot tomorrow, you will be delivered." Hope surged through the besieged town. When they received this promise, they sent word to the Ammonites, "Tomorrow we will surrender to you, and you can do to us whatever you like." But surrender was far from Saul's mind. During the night, he divided his forces into 3 groups. In the last watch, just before dawn, they struck the Ammonite camp from different directions. The surprise was total, the attack overwhelming. By midday, the Ammonite forces were scattered, with no 2 soldiers left together. The people of Jabesh-Gilead emerged from their walls to find themselves saved from mutilation and shame. The Ammonite threat had vanished like morning mist. Saul had proven himself not just tall in stature, but mighty in action. After the victory, some in Israel remembered those who had doubted Saul at his selection, who questioned, "Can Saul lead us?" They demanded, "Give us those men so we can put them to death." But Saul showed wisdom with his response. "No one will be put to death today, for this day the Lord has rescued Israel." Victory had come not from human strength, but divine help. This was a time for gratitude, not vengeance. Samuel recognized the moment was right to cement Saul's position. "Come," he said to all the people, "let us go to Gilgal, and there renew the kingship." At Gilgal, they made Saul king before the Lord, offering peace offerings and celebrating with great joy. In just days, Saul had transformed from a reluctant figure hiding among the baggage to a decisive leader who saved fellow Israelites from brutal enemies. The farmers and shepherds who followed him had become for a moment a unified fighting force. This first test revealed Saul's potential. He had shown courage, tactical thinking, and even mercy after victory. The spark of greatness glimmered in these early actions. Israel had found not just a king in title, but a leader in deed. Yet greater challenges lay ahead. The Philistines to the west posed a far more serious threat than the Ammonites. Would Saul's success continue? Could he build on this victory to create lasting security for his people? Only time would tell if this promising beginning would lead to a glorious reign. Establishing the kingdom, Saul organizes Israel's first standing army. With his position now secure after the victory over the Ammonites, Saul began the work of building Israel's first true kingdom. Until now, the tribes had acted independently, coming together only in times of crisis. This loose arrangement had left them weak against organized foes like the Philistines, who maintained trained soldiers year-round. Saul chose 3,000 men from among those who had fought with him. 2,000 stayed with him in Michmash and the hill country of Bethel, while 1,000 remained with his son Jonathan at Gibeah. The rest he sent back to their homes and fields. This small force formed Israel's first standing army. Men dedicated fully to the defense of the nation rather than called up only for emergencies. Building a kingdom meant more than gathering soldiers. Saul needed to establish his royal seat. He chose Gibeah, his hometown, rather than creating a new capital. This hill town in Benjamin provided good views of the surrounding countryside and could be defended against attack. Here, Saul lived not in a grand palace, but in a modest home, suitable for a king who had been a farmer. Around him gathered loyal followers, men of courage, who shared his vision for a unified Israel. Some served as messengers, carrying his words to distant tribes. Others became advisors on matters of justice and governance. A few, the most skilled warriors, formed his personal guard, ready to protect their king from danger. Among Saul's inner circle, none shone brighter than his son Jonathan. Young and brave, Jonathan showed the same fighting spirit as his father, but paired it with deep wisdom. The people loved him, seeing in him the promise of the future. Father and son worked together to strengthen the new kingdom. Saul also needed to address spiritual matters. Ahijah, a descendant of Eli, served as priest, wearing the ephod that allowed him to seek divine guidance. Though Samuel remained the recognized prophet, Saul recognized the need for regular priestly service closer to his royal seat. The greatest challenge facing the new kingdom came from the west. Philistine outposts dotted the borders, a constant reminder of the enemy's strength. These foreigners, with their iron weapons and battle experience, had dominated Israel for years. Their garrisons controlled key roads and trade routes, limiting Israel's freedom. Saul knew that true independence would come only when the Philistine threat was addressed. Yet, confronting them directly would require more than his small force could handle. He needed time to train his men, gather resources, and build Israel's strength. Meanwhile, he turned his attention to matters of justice. For the first time, Israel had a central authority to settle disputes between tribes. When quarrels arose over land, boundaries, or water rights, Saul's word could now resolve them. This helped bind the nation together in ways beyond military action. In villages throughout the land, daily life began to change under royal rule. Saul appointed officials to collect portions of grain and livestock, taxes to support the army and royal household. Just as Samuel had warned, kingship brought benefits but also burdens. Yet most accepted these changes, seeing them as the cost of greater security. Slowly, Saul transformed a collection of separate tribes into the beginnings of a true nation. Roads became safer for travelers. Markets grew as trade increased between regions. The king's name became known not just in Israel, but among surrounding peoples. The experiment in monarchy had begun, and many saw early signs of success. Through these quiet years of building, Saul revealed strengths that would serve Israel well: practical wisdom, physical courage, and decisive leadership. Yet shadows lurked beneath the surface, unseen flaws that would emerge only when tested by greater pressures. For now, the king watched his realm take shape with cautious hope. But in his heart, he knew the time would come when words and organization would not be enough. Sooner or later, the clash with the Philistines would determine whether Israel's new kingdom would flourish or fail. Samuel's final speech, Samuel's farewell address. As Saul's kingdom took shape, Samuel felt the weight of years pressing upon him. His beard had grown white, his steps slower. The time had come to formally pass the torch of leadership. Though he would remain Israel's prophet, the daily governance now belonged to the king. Samuel called the people to gather and hear his farewell address. They came from hillside villages and valley farms, eager to honor the man who had led them for so long. As they settled before him, a hush fell over the crowd. "I have listened to everything you said to me," Samuel began, his voice still clear despite his age. "I have set a king over you. Now you have a king as your leader. As for me, I am old and gray, and my sons are here with you. I have been your leader from my youth until this day." Samuel stretched out his hands to the assembly. "Here I stand. Testify against me in the presence of the Lord and his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? From whose hand have I accepted a bribe to make me shut my eyes? If I have done any of these things, I will make it right." The people answered as one, "You have not cheated or oppressed us. You have not taken anything from anyone's hand." With this public affirmation of his integrity, Samuel turned to the deeper message he wished to leave with them, a reminder of their covenant relationship with God. He recounted their history from the days of Jacob and Moses through the time of the judges. Each time they had forgotten God, trouble followed. Each time they returned to him, deliverance came. "But when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, was moving against you, you said to me, 'No, we want a king to rule over us,' even though the Lord your God was your king," Samuel reminded them. "Now here is the king you have chosen, the one you asked for." Samuel wished to leave no doubt about the path to blessing for Israel's future. It wasn't about the form of government, but about the condition of their hearts. "If you fear the Lord and serve and obey him, and do not rebel against his commands, and if both you and the king who reigns over you follow the Lord your God, good. But if you do not obey the Lord, and if you rebel against his commands, his hand will be against you as it was against your ancestors." To seal his words with divine confirmation, Samuel called on God to send thunder and rain, rare during the wheat harvest. When dark clouds gathered and lightning flashed moments later, the people trembled in awe. They recognized that Samuel's words carried divine authority. "Pray to the Lord your God for your servants so that we will not die," they begged Samuel, "for we have added to all our other sins the evil of asking for a king." Samuel comforted them with words of hope. "Do not be afraid. You have done all this evil, yet do not turn away from the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. For the sake of his great name, the Lord will not reject his people, because the Lord was pleased to make you his own." Then came his promise, one that would shape his remaining years. "As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you, and I will teach you the way that is good and right. But be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart." As his final warning, Samuel reminded them, "Yet if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will perish." With these words, Samuel stepped back from daily leadership. He would no longer travel a circuit through Israel, judging cases and settling disputes. That role now belonged to Saul. But Samuel would remain Israel's connection to divine guidance, the prophet who spoke God's word when needed. The people departed with mixed emotions. They honored Samuel's faithful service, yet looked forward to the new era under King Saul. Samuel himself returned to his home in Ramah, where he would continue to pray for the nation he had served his entire life. This transition marked a pivotal moment in Israel's story. The age of the judges had truly ended. The time of kings had begun. Would Israel remember the old prophet's warnings as they embraced their new form of government? Would Saul heed Samuel's counsel about serving God with a whole heart? The answers to these questions would unfold in the years ahead. But Samuel had done all he could to prepare his beloved people for the journey. He had led with integrity, spoken truth without fear, and now released them to follow the path they had chosen, with hope that they would walk it wisely. The first sign of trouble. The Philistine threat looms. 2 years passed as Saul established his kingdom. His standing army grew in skill and discipline. The people became accustomed to having a king. Yet beneath this calm surface, tensions with the Philistines continued to build. Their garrisons remained scattered throughout Israelite territory, a constant reminder of their dominance. Jonathan, Saul's son, grew restless with this arrangement. Bold and youthful, Jonathan viewed the presence of the Philistines as an offense against Israel and its God. Without informing his father one day, Jonathan launched an assault on the Philistine garrison at Gibeah, bringing his 1,000 soldiers with him. The outpost quickly collapsed under the unexpected attack. News of this triumph traveled swiftly through the villages of Israel. People spoke to each other, saying Saul had struck the Philistine garrison, believing the king himself had commanded the raid. The blare of rams' horns rang out through the hillsides as messengers declared, "Let the Hebrews take notice." Saul suddenly found himself pulled into a confrontation he had not initiated. His son's bold move put him in a challenging situation. He could not reject what Jonathan had done. However, he understood the Philistines would retaliate with massive military power. He summoned the warriors of Israel to gather at Gilgal, the holy place where his kingship had been confirmed. The Philistine counterattack arrived quickly and with frightening force. Their military assembled with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and infantry soldiers as countless as sand along the shore. This massive force advanced inland and established camp at Michmash, prepared to destroy the Israelite uprising. Seeing they faced terrible danger, the Israelite soldiers began to panic. Some concealed themselves in caves and dense brush, hiding among boulders, in holes and in cisterns. Others fled across the Jordan River into the territories of Gad and Gilead, running from the approaching conflict. The men remaining with Saul at Gilgal shook with fear at the magnitude of the Philistine forces. The king remained at Gilgal for 7 full days, the period Samuel had designated when he first received his anointing. Samuel had directed him to wait for the prophet's arrival, to present sacrifices and receive divine direction before taking any significant action. With each passing day, more Israelites abandoned their posts, and Saul witnessed his army shrinking. When the 7th day arrived, with Samuel nowhere to be seen and soldiers still deserting, Saul reached a critical decision. "Bring the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings to me," he ordered. Using his own hands, he presented the sacrifice, an act meant only for priests and prophets, never for kings. The moment he completed this, Samuel appeared. Saul stepped forward to welcome him, possibly hoping for approval of his bold action. Instead, the elderly prophet's expression revealed profound disappointment. "What is it you have done?" Samuel questioned. Saul laid out his justification. "Seeing the soldiers scattering, and that you had not arrived at the appointed time, and that the Philistines were gathering at Michmash, I concluded that the Philistines would descend upon me here at Gilgal, and I had not yet sought the Lord's blessing. Therefore, I felt forced to present the burnt offering myself." Samuel's answer came like a thunderclap. "Your action was foolish. You failed to obey the command the Lord your God issued to you. Had you obeyed, he would have secured your kingdom over Israel permanently. However, now your kingdom cannot continue. The Lord has found a man according to his own heart and designated him leader of his people, for you failed to keep the Lord's command." Saying this, Samuel departed from Gilgal, traveling upward to Geba in Benjamin. Saul made a count of the soldiers remaining with him. A mere 600 stayed from the thousands who had originally answered his summons. This episode represented the first fracture in Saul's reign. While he continued sitting on the throne and would guide Israel for many more years, something fundamental had shattered. His authority had been challenged. His decision-making had been deemed insufficient. And most disturbing of all, Samuel had suggested that someone else would ultimately claim his position. The urgent crisis with the Philistines remained unresolved. Saul relocated with his surviving soldiers to Geba, while the enormous Philistine army dominated the major routes and prime agricultural lands. The enemy even established measures to stop Israelites from creating weapons. Not a single blacksmith existed anywhere in Israel because the Philistines worried they might forge swords and spears. Saul found himself in a hopeless situation. His army was minuscule compared to the Philistine host. His warriors lacked adequate weapons. The prophet Samuel had left in anger. And somewhere, although Saul did not know the identity or location, God had evidently selected his successor. How rapidly everything had transformed. Only days earlier, Saul had been ruling confidently over a peaceful kingdom. Now he confronted impossible military circumstances and a spiritual emergency. His throne, so recently secured, abruptly seemed unstable. Nevertheless, Saul remained king. Despite Samuel's harsh words, God had not stripped him of his office. The question now centered on how he would handle this failure. Would he absorb the lesson from his error? Would he place his faith in God, even when situations appeared hopeless? Would he recall that Israel's power originated not from chariots or numerical strength, but from divine leadership? The responses would emerge through deeds, not declarations. And the initial action would come not from Saul directly, but from his son Jonathan, a young warrior who grasped that with God, numbers were meaningless. Jonathan's daring attack. Saul's son Jonathan launches a bold raid against the Philistines. While Saul contemplated his weakened position at Gaba, his son Jonathan became restless. The young prince possessed a quality his father sometimes lacked: absolute faith in God's strength over human capability. This conviction would soon ignite an unexpected shift in Israel's battle against the Philistines. One day, keeping his plan from his father, Jonathan addressed his armor-bearer. "Come, let's cross over to the Philistine garrison on the opposite side." The two of them alone would undertake what an entire army might hesitate to attempt. The route to the Philistine position wound between two towering cliffs named Bozez and Senna. Sharp rocks made the ascent challenging, forcing them to climb using both hands and feet to scale the heights. The Philistines, observing the treacherous nature of the approach, maintained only a minimal presence there, confident no assault would originate from such a route. Before acting, Jonathan explained his strategy to his armor-bearer. "Perhaps the Lord will work on our behalf. Nothing prevents the Lord from delivering, whether through many warriors or just a few." His companion's answer demonstrated matching bravery. "Do everything you have planned. Proceed. I stand with you completely, heart and soul." Jonathan then described his strategy. "We will reveal ourselves to the soldiers and allow them to observe us. Should they tell us, 'Stay there until we reach you,' we will remain in place and not advance. But should they say, 'Come up to us,' we will ascend, because that will serve as our sign that the Lord has delivered them into our grasp." When the two young warriors made themselves visible to the Philistine sentries, they received ridicule. "Look, the Hebrews are emerging from the holes where they were concealed." Then the words Jonathan anticipated arrived. "Come up to us, and we'll give you a lesson." Jonathan addressed his armor-bearer. "Follow me up. The Lord has placed them into the hand of Israel." With these words, they started their climb, crawling on hands and knees up the rocky cliff surface. Reaching the summit, Jonathan attacked the Philistines, while his armor-bearer delivered the finishing blows. During their initial assault, they eliminated approximately 20 soldiers in a space covering roughly half an acre. This modest triumph was merely the start. Abruptly, terror seized the entire Philistine encampment. The ground itself appeared to tremble, intensifying the chaos. The handful of Israelite observers at Geba detected the Philistine army dissolving in every direction. They informed Saul, "The Philistines are panicking, scattering in all directions." Saul ordered a roll call of his soldiers and realized Jonathan and his armor-bearer were absent. He immediately summoned Ahijah, the priest. "Bring the ark of God here." Before Saul could complete his consultation with the priest regarding divine instruction, the commotion from the Philistine camp intensified with sounds of escalating disorder. "Pull back your hand," Saul instructed the priest, choosing instead to strike immediately. He and his 600 warriors charged toward the fighting, discovering the Philistines in such confusion that they were attacking one another with their swords. Even those Israelites who had previously joined the Philistines or hidden in the mountains now came back to join Saul's troops. As the Israelites chased the retreating Philistines, Saul pronounced a hasty vow. "Cursed be any person who consumes food before evening arrives, before I have taken vengeance on my enemies." This requirement meant his fighters would need to battle throughout the day without sustenance. The army followed their king's order despite becoming weak from hunger as the hours passed. Jonathan, however, had not learned of his father's directive. Discovering a honeycomb in the woodland, he touched his staff to it and consumed some honey. His eyes grew brighter as energy flowed back into his exhausted body. Upon being informed about Saul's oath, he responded, "My father has created difficulty for the nation. Observe how my eyes brightened when I sampled a bit of this honey. How much more beneficial it would have been if the soldiers had eaten today from the spoils they captured from their enemies." When evening came, the famished Israelites descended upon the plunder seized from the Philistines. They killed animals and consumed meat with the blood remaining in it, a transgression of God's law. Upon hearing of this, Saul commanded a large stone to be positioned for proper slaughter of the animals. Afterward, Saul desired to keep pursuing the Philistines through the night. He requested God's direction, inquiring, "Should I descend and chase the Philistines? Will you deliver them into Israel's hand?" However, this time, no response arrived through the priest. Saul understood someone's transgression was preventing divine guidance. He assembled the army leaders and announced, "Someone has committed a sin. We must discover who it is." And listen, even should it prove to be my son Jonathan, as certainly as the Lord who delivers Israel exists, even if the fault rests with my son Jonathan, he must face death." When nobody came forward, Saul established a procedure to identify the guilty individual. Sacred lots were drawn between the army and Saul with his son. When Saul and Jonathan were indicated, a second lot was drawn between them. Jonathan was chosen. "Inform me what you have done," Saul insisted. Jonathan confessed, "I sampled a little honey with the tip of my staff, and now I must face death." Saul declared, "May God punish me harshly if you do not die, Jonathan." But the army's soldiers interfered. Should Jonathan face death, the one who has accomplished this magnificent deliverance in Israel? Absolutely not. As certainly as the Lord exists, not a single hair of his head will touch the ground, for he accomplished this today with God's assistance. Through their firm stance, the people saved Jonathan from execution. The happenings of this day disclosed much about both father and son. Jonathan demonstrated bravery, conviction, and bold action. Where Saul perceived insurmountable challenges, Jonathan recognized chances for God to act. His courageous deed sparked a victory that appeared unattainable given the military circumstances. Saul, in comparison, displayed both capabilities and shortcomings. He responded decisively once the chance emerged, but his impulsive oath hampered rather than assisted his warriors. His inflexible application of his promise nearly resulted in his son's death, revealing a rigidity that could create problems in the years approaching. This day's occurrences established a pattern that would recur throughout Saul's reign, moments of possible greatness damaged by flawed judgment. For the present, nevertheless, Israel celebrated a remarkable victory. The Philistines had been pushed back, and the people had witnessed in Jonathan the type of leadership that trusted God fully, irrespective of conditions. Following this victory, Saul battled against all the adversaries of Israel on every front, against Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he directed his forces, he delivered punishment upon them. His rule would extend for numerous years, with episodes of both success and catastrophe. But this day at Makmash had exposed the first unmistakable indications of both his abilities and his weaknesses. The initial indication of difficulty. The beginning days of Saul's reign delivered optimism to Israel. The tribes rallied under his leadership, and the people started to trust in a more promising future. Yet below this encouraging beginning, ominous clouds accumulated on the distant horizon. The Philistines, enduring adversaries of Israel, observed the emerging kingdom with increasing alarm. These veteran warriors worried that a unified Israel might contest their supremacy in the territory. They started to concentrate their forces near the boundaries, their iron weapons reflecting in the sunlight. Reports of this assembling danger arrived at Saul's attention as he conducted court in Geba. The king's forehead creased with worry as scouts described the magnitude of the Philistine army. Thousands of infantry soldiers and hundreds of chariots stood prepared to destroy the young kingdom. Saul understood he must respond swiftly. He dispatched word throughout the territory, summoning men to enlist in his forces. 3,000 were selected, a modest force in comparison to the Philistine horde. 2,000 stayed with Saul at Michmash, while 1,000 accompanied his son Jonathan at Gibeah of Benjamin. Jonathan, youthful and filled with intensity, delivered the first strike. With his small group, he assaulted a Philistine garrison at Geba. The victory was rapid and total. The Israelites celebrated, but their joy was brief. Like a nest of agitated hornets, the Philistines organized for complete war. Their reaction was swift and crushing. The earth shook under the advance of their soldiers, characterized by observers as countless as the sand along the seashore. Terror circulated through the lines of Israel's army. Many concealed themselves in caves among boulders or escaped across the Jordan River. Saul discovered his forces decreasing by the hour, with only 600 men staying by his side. The king waited nervously at Gilgal, as Samuel had directed him years previously. 7 days elapsed slowly, each dawn bringing additional deserters from Saul's camp. Still, the prophet failed to come. On the 7th day, with his soldiers abandoning him and the Philistines approaching near, Saul's patience shattered. He summoned the sacrificial animals and presented the burnt offering himself, a responsibility designated only for priests. The smoke had scarcely dissipated when Samuel materialized. "What is it you have done?" inquired the aging prophet. His voice weighted with disappointment. Saul clarified his logic. The abandoning troops, the advancing enemy, the necessity to request God's blessing before conflict. But Samuel refused to acknowledge these justifications. "You have behaved foolishly," Samuel informed the king. "You failed to obey the command the Lord your God issued to you. Had you followed it, the Lord would have secured your kingdom over Israel eternally. But now your kingdom cannot continue." These words descended like stones on Saul's heart. In a single moment of impatience, he had forfeited his dynasty's future. Though he still possessed the crown, the first profound fracture had appeared in his reign. Samuel rotated and departed Gilgal, his bent figure vanishing into the distance. Saul observed him leave, then turned to confront his shrinking army and the massive Philistine force that waited for them. The taste of his first significant error was deeply bitter. Indeed, the curse. Evening shadows extended across the battlefield as Saul organized to keep chasing the escaping Philistines through the night. The king's eyes reflected with the fire of potential victory. "Let us descend after the Philistines during the night," he instructed his soldiers, "and strip them of everything until morning. Let us not spare a single one of them." The warriors consented, but the priest Ahijah recommended they first request divine direction. When Saul petitioned the Lord, only silence responded to him. The king recognized something was amiss. "Approach here, all you commanders of the army," Saul ordered, his voice slicing through the night air. "We must identify what transgression has been committed today. As certainly as the Lord who delivers Israel exists, even if it involves my son Jonathan, he must face death." Not a single individual spoke up from the gathered troops. Saul instructed a sacred lot to be drawn, separating himself and Jonathan from the remainder of the army. When the lot indicated them, his heart dropped. A second drawing separated father from son, and the lot indicated Jonathan. "Inform me what you have done," Saul insisted of his son. Jonathan's answer was straightforward. "I merely sampled a little honey on the tip of my staff, and now must I die." The crowd became silent. Here stood the hero whose courage had initiated this magnificent victory, condemned because of an oath many deemed unwise. Saul's expression hardened as he proclaimed, "May God punish me harshly if you do not die, Jonathan." But the people refused to permit it. They positioned themselves between father and son. "Should Jonathan die, he who has accomplished this magnificent deliverance in Israel?" "Absolutely not," they objected. "As certainly as the Lord exists, not a single hair of his head will touch the ground, for he accomplished this today with God's assistance." For the first time, Saul's authority was openly contested by his people. Reluctantly, he surrendered. Jonathan was saved, but the chase of the Philistines was discontinued. The opportunity for complete victory had vanished. This episode disclosed a developing problem in Saul's leadership. His impulsive words nearly resulted in his son's death and deprived Israel of its hero. The king's recklessness started to eclipse his superior qualities. Throughout his reign, Saul battled courageously against all the adversaries of Israel, Moabites, Ammonites, and the kings of Zobah. For a period, he repelled the Philistines and delivered a degree of security to the territory. He assembled mighty fighters to his side and worked to reinforce the kingdom. Yet, beneath these achievements, warning indicators multiplied. The king, who had once been modest, now displayed flashes of arrogance and weak judgment. His dependence on his own understanding increased, while his faith in divine guidance diminished. The tension between Saul and Samuel kept intensifying. The prophet observed from a distance as the king made choice after choice, grounded in political convenience rather than loyalty to God's commands. A final examination would soon expose the extent of this division between them. This moment of crisis with Jonathan represented a turning point. Though the prince survived, something shifted in how the people perceived their king. Questions emerged about Saul's wisdom and disposition. The crown stayed on his head, but its brilliance had diminished ever so slightly in the perception of Israel. Night descended on the discontinued pursuit, and Saul returned to his royal tent. Sleep arrived slowly to the king that night, his mind disturbed by the day's occurrences and unaware that far more significant challenges to his reign waited just beyond the horizon. Samuel's harsh words, "The morning sun created long shadows," as Samuel arrived at Saul's camp. The old prophet's expression was severe, his message direct. "I am the person the Lord dispatched to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord." Samuel conveyed God's directive. Saul was to assault the Amalekites, ancient adversaries who had ambushed Israel during their exodus from Egypt generations previously. The instruction was severe and absolute. Destroy everything and everyone. No spoils, no captives, no compromise. Saul acknowledged solemnly and assembled his forces, 200,000 infantry soldiers and 10,000 men from Judah. Before launching the attack, he cautioned the Kenites, friendly neighbors of the Amalekites, to depart the area. The conflict developed rapidly. Israel's forces swept through Amalekite land, from Havilah to Shur, east of Egypt. They seized Og, the Amalekite king, and overcame his people. But then arrived Saul's critical choice. Instead of adhering to God's directive fully, Saul and his soldiers spared Og. They also preserved the finest sheep, cattle, lambs, and everything valuable. Only what was worthless and feeble did they eliminate. That night, as Saul rested, Samuel received a disturbing message from God. "I regret that I appointed Saul king because he has abandoned me and has failed to execute my directions." The prophet's heart was weighted as he departed early the following morning to confront the king. When Samuel reached his destination, Saul welcomed him cordially. "The Lord bless you. I have executed the Lord's directions," Saul announced. Samuel's reply was direct. "What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this bellowing of cattle that I perceive?" Discovered in his disobedience, Saul started offering justifications. He blamed the warriors for preserving the finest animals, asserting they were kept for sacrifice to God. His words exposed the distance between his actions and God's commands. Samuel interrupted him. "Stop. Permit me to tell you what the Lord communicated to me last night." As the ascending sun projected their shadows across the earth, Samuel presented one of the most renowned rebukes in Scripture. "Does the Lord find pleasure in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in following the Lord? To follow is superior to sacrifice, and to pay attention is superior to the fat of rams. For defiance resembles the sin of divination, and stubbornness like the wickedness of idolatry." Then arrived the dreadful announcement. "Because you have dismissed the word of the Lord, he has dismissed you as king." Terror flashed across Saul's face. He confessed his transgression and pleaded for pardon, grasping at Samuel's robe so urgently that it tore. Samuel interpreted this as an indication. "The Lord has removed the kingdom of Israel from you today and has granted it to one of your neighbors, to someone superior to you." Though Samuel consented to worship with Saul one final time to preserve appearances before the elders, their relationship had fundamentally transformed. Before leaving, the prophet himself executed the command Saul had disregarded. He put Agag to execution. As Samuel rotated to depart, both men understood they would never encounter again. The prophet would travel to his home in Ramah to mourn for Saul, while the king returned to Gibeah with a crown that now rested uneasily upon his head. The kingdom dismissed. Sorrow lingered heavily in Samuel's home in Ramah. The old prophet mourned for Saul, not merely for the king he had become, but for the promise he had once displayed. Days transformed to weeks as Samuel carried this weight. Finally, God spoke. "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have dismissed him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and proceed on your way. I am dispatching you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have selected one of his sons to be king." Samuel wavered. "How can I proceed? Saul will learn about it and execute me." The Lord supplied a strategy. Samuel would travel to Bethlehem under the guise of presenting a sacrifice. He would invite Jesse's family to the ceremony, and there God would disclose the selected son. Meanwhile, in Gibeah, Saul attempted to continue his reign as though nothing had transformed. He guided his troops, conducted court, and wore his crown. But internally, darkness increased. Though still king in title, he sensed his hold on authority weakening. When Samuel reached Bethlehem, the town elders trembled. The prophet rarely traveled without serious purpose. He reassured them he came in peace and invited them to a sacrifice along with Jesse and his sons. As the sons of Jesse were introduced one by one, Samuel was certain he would identify the future king. When Eliab, tall and attractive, stepped forward, Samuel thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here." But God whispered, "Do not consider his appearance or his stature, for I have dismissed him. The Lord does not observe the things people observe. People observe the external appearance, but the Lord observes the heart." 7 sons passed before Samuel, yet none was God's selection. Confused, the prophet questioned Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse responded. "He is attending the sheep." They summoned him, and soon a ruddy, attractive youth with vivid eyes entered. Something about him caused Samuel's horn of oil to shake in his hand. "Rise and anoint him," God said. "This is the one." As the oil streamed down the young David's head, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. And at that identical moment, far away in Gibeah, that same Spirit withdrew from Saul. What followed for Saul was agony of the soul. Scripture characterizes an evil spirit from the Lord afflicting him. Whether this was depression, paranoia, or something more supernatural, the king's servants detected the transformation. "Let us locate someone who performs the lyre," they proposed. "When the evil spirit from God comes upon you, he will perform, and you will feel improved." Saul agreed, and the search started for a talented musician. One servant referenced a son of Jesse of Bethlehem, a courageous warrior, articulate, attractive, and gifted with the lyre. More significantly, the Lord is with him. Unaware that this young man had been anointed to succeed him, Saul dispatched messengers to Jesse requesting his son's service. Jesse sent David to the king with gifts, bread, wine, and a young goat. When David reached the court, Saul developed an immediate fondness for him. The young shepherd became his armor-bearer and musician. Whenever the dark periods descended on the king, David would perform his lyre, and Saul would discover relief. In one of history's most peculiar twists, the man selected to succeed Saul now served in his court, calming the very anguish caused by his own selection. Neither man fully grasped the path that extended ahead. One ascending, one descending, both connected together in a tragedy still developing. As the notes of David's lyre filled the royal chambers, they provided temporary peace to the disturbed king. But no music could alter the word Samuel had spoken or heal the wound in Saul's soul, the awareness that he stood dismissed as king. The secret anointing of David. In the fields of Bethlehem, life transformed little for David after Samuel's visit. The oil had dried in his hair, but he returned to tending his father's sheep. The prophet's words remained a secret shared by few. David continued to observe over his flock, protect them from predators, and compose songs under open skies. Meanwhile, in the palace, Saul's condition deteriorated. His moments of clarity became fewer, while his dark periods lasted longer. When David performed his lyre, the king discovered temporary relief. But when the music ceased, the shadows returned. David's time at court was not continuous. He divided his days between the palace and his father's fields. During his absence from the royal court, events beyond his control were developing, events that would propel him from obscurity into the spotlight. The Philistines, encouraged by reports of Saul's unstable condition, assembled their forces at Su and Judah. Their army established camp between Su and Azekah at Ephes Damim, a strategic position threatening Israel's heartland. Saul responded by gathering Israel's forces and establishing camp in the valley of Elah. The two armies confronted each other across the valley, neither initiating the first move. A standoff commenced that would persist for 40 days. Then a giant emerged forward from the Philistine lines. Goliath of Gath stood over 9 feet tall, with armor of bronze weighing more than 125 pounds. His spear tip alone weighed 15 pounds. A shield-bearer walked before him. Each morning and evening this towering figure shouted across the valley, "Select a man and have him descend to me. If he is capable to fight and eliminate me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and eliminate him, you will become our subjects and serve us." His taunts resonated off the hills, draining the courage of Israel's army. Even Saul, who stood head and shoulders above other Israelites, made no move to accept the challenge. For 40 days, Goliath's voice brought dread to Israel's camp. It was during this time that Jesse dispatched David to check on his 3 oldest brothers who were serving in Saul's army. The youngest son arrived at the camp with roasted grain, loaves of bread, and 10 cheeses, gifts from his father to the commanders. David arrived at the camp as the army was advancing out to its battle positions, leaving his supplies with the keeper of provisions. He rushed to the battle lines to greet his brothers. As they conversed, Goliath emerged forward with his daily challenge. The young shepherd observed as Israel's soldiers fled in fear. He heard them discussing the reward Saul had promised to anyone who eliminated the giant: wealth, exemption from taxes, and the king's daughter in marriage. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should challenge the armies of the living God? David questioned, his voice carrying conviction that captured the attention of those nearby. Word of the youth's unusual reaction arrived at Saul, who summoned him. Standing before the king, David made a stunning proposal. "Let no one lose courage on account of this Philistine. Your servant will proceed and fight him." Saul was doubtful. "You are not capable to proceed out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." David described how he had eliminated both a lion and a bear while protecting his father's sheep. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Something in David's confidence influenced the desperate king. "Proceed, and the Lord be with you," Saul finally agreed. The remainder of the story is among the most renowned in human history. Declining Saul's armor, David confronted Goliath with only his staff, sling, and 5 smooth stones. The giant laughed at the sight of the ruddy youth and cursed him by his gods. David's reply resonates through the ages. "You advance against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I advance against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have challenged." With 1 stone from his sling, David struck the giant in the forehead. Goliath collapsed face down on the ground. Using the giant's own sword, David removed his head. The Philistines escaped in panic, pursued by the suddenly emboldened Israelites. What commenced as a standoff concluded in decisive victory. David returned to Saul's presence carrying the head of Goliath, no longer just a shepherd boy or musician, but a national hero. Unknown to the celebrating crowds, this victory represented the beginning of a complicated dance between 2 anointed kings. One ruling in the present, one destined for the future. The oil Samuel had poured on David's head started to glisten in the public eye. Saul's anguish. Dark clouds assembled over Saul's mind as he observed David's popularity increase. The young hero's victory over Goliath had launched him from obscurity to fame overnight. Soldiers respected him, courtiers admired him, and Saul's own son Jonathan formed an immediate connection with him. When David returned from battle, women emerged from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul. They danced and sang with tambourines and lutes. Saul has eliminated his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. These words sliced into Saul's heart like a knife. They have attributed David with tens of thousands, he muttered, but me with only thousands. What more can he obtain but the kingdom? From that day forward, Saul maintained a jealous eye on David. The king, who had once discovered comfort in the young man's music, now heard every note as a danger to his throne. The following day, an evil spirit came powerfully upon Saul. As he sat in his house with his spear in hand, David performed the lyre as usual. Suddenly, without warning, Saul launched his spear at David, intending to pin him to the wall. Twice he threw, and twice David escaped. Fear now combined with Saul's jealousy. He recognized that the Lord was with David, but had withdrawn from him. In an attempt to remove David from his presence, Saul appointed him a commander over 1,000 men and dispatched him out to battle. This backfired terribly. Away from court, David's leadership skills flourished. He acted wisely in everything he accomplished, and his success only increased. All Israel and Judah loved him. Observing this, Saul devised a more subtle strategy. He presented his daughter Meb to David in marriage, thinking, "I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines accomplish that." David responded humbly, "Who am I, and what is my family or my clan in Israel that I should become the king's son-in-law?" When the time for the wedding arrived, Moab was given to another man. But Saul learned that his younger daughter, Michal, was in love with David. This presented another opportunity to ensnare him. "Here is a second chance for you to become my son-in-law," Saul told David. To his servants he whispered, "Inform David. The king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." Saul hoped David would die attempting this dangerous mission. Instead, David and his men eliminated 200 Philistines, presenting their foreskins to the king. Saul had no choice but to grant him in marriage. As David's star continued to ascend, Saul's anguish deepened. The king openly instructed Jonathan and his attendants to eliminate David. But Jonathan, who loved David as himself, cautioned him, "My father Saul is searching for a chance to eliminate you. Be on your guard." Jonathan spoke favorably of David to his father and persuaded Saul to take an oath. "As certainly as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." For a time, peace returned. David served in Saul's court as before, fighting the Philistines and winning great victories. But Saul's stability was fragile. When the evil spirit returned, so did his murderous intentions. Once more, as David performed the lyre, Saul's spear flew through the air. Once more, David escaped. This time he escaped to his home. Saul dispatched men to observe David's house, planning to eliminate him in the morning. But Michal, Saul's own daughter and David's wife, let him down through a window. She placed an idol in his bed with goat's hair on its head, buying time for his escape. When Saul's men entered to seize David, they discovered only the idol. Saul demanded of Michal, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped?" Michal answered, "He told me, 'Let me depart.' Why should I eliminate you?" David escaped to Ramah, where Samuel lived. There, in the company of the prophet who had anointed both him and Saul, he discovered temporary sanctuary. But Saul's rage would not be denied. The tormented king pursued David to Ramah, but something extraordinary occurred as he approached. The Spirit of God came even upon Saul, and he prophesied before Samuel. For one day, his murderous intentions were suspended by divine intervention. This respite was brief. Soon the dance of pursuit would commence again, with Saul driven by fear and jealousy, and David running for his life. The king's anguish had become an anguish for the entire nation. dividing loyalties and testing faith in God's plan for Israel. Saul's love and hate. Dawn broke over the hills of Israel as David escaped from Ramah. The temporary reprieve at Samuel's settlement had concluded, and now he sought help from an unexpected source, Jonathan, Saul's son and heir. "What have I done?" David questioned his friend. "And what is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he is attempting to eliminate me?" Jonathan could hardly believe his father would take such action without informing him. "This cannot be true. My father doesn't accomplish anything without informing me." But David insisted, "Your father knows very well that you are fond of me. He thinks Jonathan must not know this or he will be distressed. Yet as certainly as the Lord lives, I am only a step away from death." The prince's loyalty was divided between his father and his friend. He promised to help David uncover the truth and devise a strategy. The following day would be the new moon festival, and David's absence from the king's table would test Saul's intentions. "Go into hiding in the field," Jonathan proposed. "I will speak to my father and inform you what I discover." When the festival arrived, David's seat remained empty. On the first day, Saul said nothing, assuming David was ceremonially unclean. But when David was absent on the second day, Saul questioned Jonathan. "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today?" Jonathan provided the agreed-upon excuse that David had requested permission to attend a family sacrifice in Bethlehem. Saul's reaction disclosed everything. His anger flared against his son. "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman! Don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be secured." Then arrived the command, "Dispatch someone to bring him to me, for he must die." When Jonathan objected, questioning what David had done wrong, Saul launched his spear at his own son. In that moment, Jonathan understood David had been right all along. His father was determined to eliminate his friend. The following morning, Jonathan traveled to the field with a small boy. Using the prearranged signal, he shot arrows beyond the boy, calling out, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" This cautioned David that he must escape. After sending the boy back to town, Jonathan and David met briefly in the field. They wept together, knowing their friendship would now be tested by distance and danger. "Go in peace," Jonathan said, "for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" David escaped first to Noob, where Amalek the priest gave him consecrated bread and the sword of Goliath. Unknown to David, one of Saul's servants, Dog the Edomite, witnessed this act of kindness. From there, David escaped to Gath, ironically seeking refuge among the Philistines, his former enemies. When he realized he had been recognized as Israel's champion, he feigned madness, scribbling on doors and letting saliva run down his beard. The ruse worked. The king of Gath sent him away. David's next hiding place was the cave of Adullam. There his family joined him, along with everyone who was in distress or in debt or discontented. About 400 men assembled around him, forming the core of what would become his personal army. For Saul, David's growing band of followers only confirmed his worst fears. The young man he had once loved as a son now appeared to be raising forces against him. The king's emotions swung wildly, one moment showing glimpses of the man he had once been, the next consumed by paranoid rage. In a rare moment of clarity, Saul addressed his officials. "Listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you have all conspired against me?" No one answered the king's accusations. Saul's mind had created a conspiracy where none existed. The tragedy deepened as the man selected to lead Israel now saw enemies in every shadow. Back in the wilderness, David moved from place to place, staying one step ahead of Saul's pursuit. The love that had once connected king and subject had twisted into something dark and dangerous. Yet, even as Saul's hatred increased, a portion of the nation's heart started to turn toward the fugitive who would one day wear the crown, Goliath. The valley stretches wide and empty, a dusty expanse under the burning sun. On one side, the Philistine army stands in tight formation, spears and shields catching the light, rows of men shifting uneasily. On the other, the army of Israel waits, their lines thinner, eyes fixed on the giant in the center of the field. Goliath steps forward, his armor gleams, bronze plates layered over muscled flesh. He is a wall of a man, nearly 10 feet tall, his helmet glinting like the head of a god. He raises his spear, its shaft as thick as a weaver's beam, and points it toward the Israelites. His voice rumbles across the valley deep as thunder. "Why have you come out to set up battle?" he roars. "Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Select a man to descend to me. If he can fight me and strike me down, we will be your servants. But if I prevail, you shall serve us." The words hang heavy in the air. For 40 days, Goliath has issued this challenge, 40 days of jeering, taunting, pacing the field like a lion waiting for prey. The Israelites tremble, their courage draining. Even King Saul, tall and battle-hardened, cannot bring himself to answer. But this day a new face walks among them, a young shepherd from Bethlehem, David. David moves through the ranks, eyes scanning the field. He hears Goliath's voice echoing across the valley, the giant's boasts loud and cruel. David frowns. The soldiers around him shake their heads, muttering, "Have you seen this man?" one says, eyes fixed on Goliath. "He comes to challenge Israel. The king will reward the man who strikes him down." David's jaw tightens. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should challenge the armies of the living God? His brothers scowl. "Why are you here, David? Return to the sheep. You have no place here." But David's eyes remain fixed on the giant. He feels a steady warmth building inside, a calm certainty. He turns to a nearby soldier. "Inform Saul I will fight him." The soldier laughs. You are but a boy. The Lord who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver me from this Philistine," David says, his voice even and clear. The soldier studies David's face. The boy's eyes do not waver. With a sigh, the man nods and turns toward Saul's tent. Inside the tent, Saul sits, head bowed, fingers clenched around the hilt of his sword. The king's face is drawn, eyes dark. He looks up as David enters. "Let no man's heart fail because of him," David says. "I will proceed and fight this Philistine." Saul blinks. He studies David, the boy's face young, his arms slender. "You cannot fight him," Saul says. "You are a boy, and he has been a warrior since his youth." David takes a step forward. "When I kept my father's sheep, a lion came and a bear. I struck them down. The same God who delivered me then will deliver me now." Saul's eyes narrow. He stands, walks to a rack of armor, and lifts his own breastplate. "Here," he says, strapping it to David's chest. "Take my sword. The armor is heavy." It hangs off David's shoulders like stone. He struggles to lift the sword, the weight pulling him down. David shakes his head. "I cannot wear this. I have not tested it." Saul's shoulders sag. David sets the armor down, steps outside, and walks to the stream that runs through the valley. He kneels, eyes scanning the ground. The water rushes softly, a gentle murmur beneath the clash of distant armor. David's fingers close around 5 smooth stones. He slips them into his shepherd's pouch, rises, and walks back to the field. The air is thick with heat and dust. Goliath stands waiting, his eyes narrowed as David steps forward, a shepherd's staff in one hand, a sling in the other. Goliath throws back his head and laughs. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? Approach here, and I will feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." David's eyes are calm, his gaze steady. "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin," he says, voice clear as a bell. "But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have challenged. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand." Goliath's grin vanishes, his face hardens, and he lunges forward. The ground trembles beneath his feet. David raises his sling, his hand a blur as the stone spins faster and faster. In a single fluid motion, he lets it fly. The stone arcs through the air, cutting the silence. It strikes Goliath between the eyes with a dull thud. The giant's eyes go wide. For a moment, time seems to stop, and then Goliath falls. The ground shakes as his body crashes to the earth, dust rising in a cloud around him. David walks forward, the field utterly still. He takes Goliath's sword, lifts it high, and removes the giant's head. The Philistines stare, horror-struck. Then they break, fleeing in panic. The valley falls silent. The only sound, the whisper of wind through the grass. David stands alone, a shepherd boy in a field of soldiers, the giant's head heavy in his hand. Saul's love and hate. Saul observes David as he returns from battle. The people assemble in the streets, their voices a sea of praise. Women dance with tambourines, their voices rising like bird song. Saul has eliminated his thousands, they sing, but David his tens of thousands. Saul's jaw tightens. The words echo in his mind, each syllable striking like a hammer. His grip on the spear in his hand tightens. David, his once trusted harpist, now stands at the center of their admiration. The young man smiles, his face open and free, as if unaware of the storm gathering behind Saul's eyes. That night, the palace is quiet. Saul sits alone, the room thick with shadows. David enters with his harp. He performs softly, the notes drifting like mist, easing the king's troubled mind. But the music does not calm Saul as it once did. It only deepens the ache. Each note reminds him of what he has lost, the favor of God, the loyalty of his people, the legacy he once believed was his. David's fingers move over the strings. The melody swirls and dips, a gentle lullaby. Saul observes him. The flicker of torchlight dances over David's face. In that moment, Saul is torn. David is like a son to him, a brave, loyal, gifted young man who brings comfort in Saul's darkest hours. Yet David is also a threat, a rising star whose light casts a shadow over Saul's own. Saul's eyes drop to the spear resting beside him. The urge wells up, sudden and fierce. A single throw, and it would all be over. The thought twists in his mind as cold and sharp as the spear's point, but his hand trembles. He does nothing. Not yet. Days pass, and the tension increases. David continues to lead Saul's armies. Every victory brings more praise, more songs, more admiration. Saul hears the whispers. The people love David. The people trust David. The people want David. Saul's heart burns with jealousy. But mixed with the envy is a terrible sadness, a longing for the days when he was the hero, the chosen one. Jonathan sees his father's struggle. He tries to reason with him. "David is loyal to you," he says. "He has done nothing but serve you faithfully." Saul nods, but his eyes are distant, hand fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something he cannot find. In the court, David performs his harp, his music a balm for Saul's tormented mind. Saul listens, eyes closed, jaw clenched. The music drifts through the air, gentle as wind, yet it fails to touch the tempest within. David's company, which once brought comfort, now pierces Saul like a sharp thorn. One night, while David performs, Saul's hand drifts toward the spear once more. His grip tightens around it, fingers pressed until the knuckles turn pale. The atmosphere grows dense, oppressive. David's eyelids are shut, absorbed in the melody. Saul's breathing becomes labored. In an explosive moment of fury, he launches the spear. It cuts through space, whistling toward where David had been standing. But David reacts swiftly. He moves aside. The weapon drives itself into the wall at his back, shaking like the tail of a serpent. A silence follows. David's gaze finds Saul's. Within that exchange lies bewilderment, pain, and something more. A trace of terror. Wordlessly, David stands and exits the chamber. Saul observes his departure, his chest heaving with each breath. The spear stays lodged in the wall, a mute indictment. In the dimness of the empty room, Saul drops to his knees, his lungs strain for air. The chants from the masses continue to echo in his mind, David with his tens of thousands. And within that persistent chorus, Saul recognizes the sound of his own diminishing legacy. The initial attempt on his life. Saul now keeps close watch over David. The songs continue flowing through the streets, women chanting about Saul's thousands and David's tens of thousands. The lyrics burn like thorns. They needle Saul's consciousness, erode his rest. David strums the harp to bring him ease, the melodious tones saturating the space, yet they accomplish nothing toward quieting the turmoil within Saul. Saul's attention locks onto the young man, the shepherd who defeated a giant. David's hands glide softly across the strings, gaze lowered, oblivious. But for Saul, those hands represent danger. Those hands, which previously wielded a sling, now command the devotion of the people. And Saul, despite all his authority, feels his own control weakening. A spear rests alongside Saul's throne, weighty and frigid. His fingers twitch. The weapon catches the torchlight, a sinister gleam matching the thoughts occupying Saul's mind. The chamber sits in silence. The sole sound, the gentle strumming of David's instrument. In an instant, Saul grabs the spear. His arm rises, muscles growing taut. David continues playing, unaware of the threat looming behind. Saul's eyes ignite. Fury and terror blend in his stare, and momentarily, time suspends itself. Then, with one rapid movement, Saul throws the spear. It slices the air, a lethal whisper of steel. But David shifts position. The spear crashes into the stone with a forceful, reverberating impact, trembling where David's skull had been. Mere moments earlier, David's eyes grow wide, his breath halts in his chest. The spear quivers against the rock, a frightening testament to how near death had approached. Saul's expression turns dark, jaw locked tight, eyes frenzied. David rises, his pulse racing, and silently he escapes into the darkness. Beyond the walls, the cool night air surrounds David like fabric. The heavens form a canopy of deep velvet, stars spread like scattered sand. David travels quickly, his footsteps pounding the ground. The streets lie deserted, the city sleeping. But David finds no rest. Saul's eyes, that shadowed violent stare, pursue him. He understands now, Saul's pursuit will not cease. Not until David no longer lives. David discovers shelter in Samuel's community of Ramah. There, beside the prophet, he regains his breath. Samuel pays attention. His aged eyes carry weight, his forehead creased. The man who previously anointed Saul now provides refuge for Saul's adversary. Yet Samuel mentions nothing regarding kings or crowns. He simply nods and provides David a location to rest. Time moves forward. Word travels. The people learn of the king's instability, of David's flight. And with each retelling, David's reputation amplifies. He represents the champion who defeated Goliath, the devoted servant who performed the harp for a suffering king, the young fighter who escaped the king's fury. And Saul, the people whisper, their king has become a shadow of his former self. Eyes hollow, hands clenched, moving through the palace like a caged lion. He speaks to himself, dark thoughts like a cloud of insects circling in his consciousness. He knows David exists somewhere, alive, drawing breath, and the notion consumes him like a worm eating through fruit. The days melt into one another. David conceals himself. Saul continues his search. One man, a refugee, the other a king coming undone. The space between them expands, but the tension stretches taut like a bowstring. and somewhere within the silent intervals between heartbeats, the question lingers. How much time before another spear takes flight? Jonathan and David. Within the shadow of the royal court, a friendship flourished like none before. Jonathan, the crown prince of Israel, discovered his soul connected with David's, the modest shepherd turned fighter. Their connection transcended ordinary bonds between men. Upon their initial meeting following David's triumph over Goliath, something remarkable occurred. Jonathan, stirred by David's bravery and faith, presented him with his personal royal garments, sword, bow, and belt. This wasn't simply generosity, it represented a sacred connection forming between them. "Your father wants me dead," David murmured to Jonathan one day during a secret meeting. The prince resisted believing it initially. "My father shares everything with me," he maintained. But Jonathan eventually recognized the truth. At a feast during the new moon, Saul took notice of David's vacant seat. When Jonathan explained that David had traveled to Bethlehem for a family event, Saul's anger erupted. "You offspring of a corrupt, rebellious woman," he shouted at his own child. "Don't I recognize that you have selected David to your own disgrace?" In that instant, Jonathan grasped the extent of his father's hatred. The following morning, he traveled to a field where they had planned to meet. A young boy ran forward as Jonathan launched arrows past him, calling out a coded signal intended for David's understanding. "The arrow lies beyond you." After the boy departed, David came out from concealment. The two friends held each other, tears falling down their cheeks. "Go in peace," Jonathan said to him. "The Lord stands witness of the bond between us and our descendants forever." They didn't realize then, but this would mark their final peaceful encounter. Jonathan returned to the palace and his obligation to his father. David escaped into the wilderness. Their paths had diverged, but their hearts stayed as one. Saul's daughter, Michal. While Jonathan loved David as kin, Michal loved him with a woman's devotion. She was Saul's younger daughter, and her attention followed David whenever he moved through the palace corridors. Saul observed her yearning glances, a plan shaped in his mind, not one of blessing, but of destruction. "I will present her to him," Saul instructed his servants, "so that she may become a trap for him." When David learned the king would make him his son by marriage, he lowered his head. "Who am I? And what is my family that I should become the king's son by marriage?" His words conveyed humility, but perhaps also wariness. Saul established a bride price, not precious metals or currency, but the foreskins of 100 Philistines. He anticipated David would perish by their weapons, but David and his men killed 200 Philistines instead, doubling what Saul had requested. And so Michal became David's wife. For a short time, there existed joy in their household. But Saul's hatred expanded like a toxic vine, suffocating any possibility of peace. One night the king dispatched men to observe David's house, intending to kill him at daybreak. Michal noticed them from her window. "If you don't flee tonight, tomorrow you will perish," she cautioned her husband. With swift hands, she assisted David through a window. Then she positioned an idol in their bed, covering it with garments and goat's hair to resemble a sleeping person. When Saul's men forced entry the next morning, they discovered only Michal's ingenious deception. "Why did you deceive me?" Saul later questioned his daughter. "He threatened me," she lied, attempting to save herself from her father's rage. Yet, in preserving David's life, Michal lost his company. Years would elapse before she encountered her husband again, and by then, much would have transformed between them. Saul's escalating madness. The corridors of the palace turned quiet. Where music and joy once resonated, now only murmurs dared disturb the silence. Servants moved like phantoms, frightened of attracting the king's attention. Saul sat for extended periods on his throne, hands gripping the armrests, eyes shifting at every movement. The spirit that afflicted him arrived more frequently now, enveloping his mind in shadowed thoughts. "He's somewhere out there," Saul would mumble to his advisers. David waits to seize my crown. My own son plots with him. My daughter deceived me for him. When intelligence arrived that David had been sighted in one location or another, Saul would assemble his men with sudden vigor. 3,000 selected soldiers would advance with him, combing mountains and valleys, caves and forests. One morning, as sunrise appeared over the hills, a scout hurried to Saul's tent. We located him. David camps near the springs of En-Gedi. Saul's eyes gleamed. The Lord has handed him over to me. But rational thinking slipped away more readily now. Sometimes Saul would stand in the center of a village, having lost memory of why he came. Other times, he would command his men to execute innocent people who he alleged were concealing David. His closest advisers traded concerned looks as their king raved about conspiracies. Vanished was the tall, attractive leader who had previously saved them from the Ammonites. In his place stood a hunched figure, graying prematurely, startling at shadows. At night, isolated in his tent, Saul sometimes recalled who he had been. In those silent moments, tears would emerge. But morning invariably brought back the madness, and with it, the pursuit of David would commence again. David, in concealment. The wilderness transformed into David's dwelling, rocky slopes and barren ravines, caves and arid riverbeds. These became his palace now. With him journeyed a growing company of men, approximately 400 initially, later 600. They were the troubled, the debt-ridden, the embittered of spirit. "Why follow me?" David asked them when they first arrived. "I have no land to offer you, no treasures to distribute." A weathered man stepped forward. "We've witnessed your heart. You fight for what's righteous. That's worth more than precious metals." Daily existence took on a simple pattern. They hunted for sustenance, maintained watch for Saul's troops, and relocated their camp frequently. At night, David would retrieve his harp and play quietly, songs of trust in God amid the storm. In the cave of Adullam, dark and cool against the desert heat, David discovered moments of tranquility. His family joined him there, seeking protection from Saul's reach. Even the prophet Gad arrived, bringing guidance from the Lord. The men regarded David not just as their captain, but as their judge. When disagreements emerged, they brought them to him. When danger approached, they followed his instructions without hesitation. Yet David never declared himself king, though Samuel had anointed him years before. "The Lord will bring about his word in his time," he would say when pressed. "Until then we wait." One day, a young Amalekite raider was captured stealing from their supplies. The men dragged him before David, demanding harsh punishment. David looked at the hungry youth and remembered his own desperate days. "Give him food and let him go," he ordered. "We were all lost once." Such mercy earned him loyalty stronger than any fear could command. In caves and wilderness camps, far from the comforts of the palace, David was learning to be the king Israel would need, though the crown remained distant. The priests of Nob, the small town of Nob, sat peacefully on a hill, recognized throughout Israel as a place of God. There the priests served in the tabernacle, burning incense and offering sacrifices, as they had since the days of Moses. Ahimelech was chief among the priests, a gentle man with hands marked by years of holy service. When David appeared alone at the sanctuary one day, the priest greeted him with respect. "Why are you alone?" Ahimelech asked, trembling slightly. Usually the king's son by marriage traveled with companions. "The king has assigned me a secret mission," David lied, hunger and fear clouding his judgment. "Do you have any bread?" Only the holy bread was available, the showbread taken from before the Lord and replaced with fresh loaves each Sabbath. Against tradition, but moved by compassion, Ahimelech gave David the sacred bread. "Do you have a spear or sword?" David asked next. "The king's business was urgent, and I didn't bring my weapons." "Only the sword of Goliath is here," the priest answered, bringing out the massive blade wrapped in cloth. David's eyes lit up. "There is none like it. Give it to me." What neither noticed was Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief shepherd, watching from the shadows as he came to worship that day. Later, when Saul raged about David's continued escape, Doeg stepped forward. "I saw the son of Jesse at Nob," he reported. "Ahimelech gave him bread and Goliath's sword. Saul summoned all the priests of Nob." Despite Ahimelech's honest defense, rage filled the king's heart. "You have conspired with David against me," he accused. Then came words that would forever stain Saul's reign. "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord." When the king's guards hesitated, Doeg took up the sword himself. 85 priests died that day, their white linen garments staining red. Not stopping there, Saul sent men to destroy the entire town of Nob. Only Abiathar, one of Ahimelech's sons, escaped to tell David the terrible news. David's face fell as he heard the account. "I am responsible for the death of your father's house," he told Abiathar with deep sorrow. "Stay with me. You will be safe." The massacre marked a turning point. No longer was this simply a jealous king chasing a rival. Saul had struck against the Lord's anointed servants, crossing a line from which there could be no return. The caves of Adullam. The cave's mouth opened like a giant's yawn in the side of the hill. Inside, the air stayed cool, even when summer sun baked the land outside. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady rhythm marking time. This was Adullam, where David gathered his growing force. Men flowed to him like streams to a river, each with his own story of hardship or hope. "My brothers, my father's house has joined us," David announced one evening as they sat around flickering fires, "but I worry for their safety." After thought and prayer, David traveled to Moab, east of the Dead Sea. "Please let my father and mother stay with you until I know what God will do for me," he asked the king there. The Moabite ruler agreed, providing sanctuary for Jesse's household. Back at Adullam, David shaped his band of outcasts into a disciplined force. Those skilled with bow or sling taught others. Men who had been enemies now shared bread as brothers. Former shepherds and farmers became warriors. "We don't fight for vengeance," David reminded them often. "We protect the innocent. Remember who we are." When word came that Philistines were raiding the village of Keilah, stealing the freshly harvested grain, David's men hesitated. "We're safe here," one argued. "Why risk ourselves for strangers?" David sought God's guidance, then told his men, "We go to save Keilah." The battle was swift and decisive. The surprised Philistines fell before David's force, and the people of Keilah welcomed their saviors with joy. Yet safety proved fleeting. A messenger arrived breathless. "Saul has heard you're in Keilah. He comes with an army." Again, David sought divine wisdom. "Will the people of Keilah surrender me to Saul?" he asked. The answer came with painful clarity. They would. So once more, David and his men, now 600 strong, returned to the wilderness and its caves. They became like ghosts, appearing to help villages in need, then vanishing before Saul's forces could arrive. In those hard days, the caves of Adullam taught David lessons no palace could. How to lead men whose loyalty came not from duty, but from choice. How to find water in dry places. How to trust God when the future remained hidden in shadow. The hunt for David had become Saul's obsession. Fields lay unharvested as men were called to join the king's pursuit. The borders went unguarded while Israel's army combed the wilderness for one man. After months of fruitless searching, Saul received word that David had been spotted in the wilderness of En-Gedi, where steep cliffs met the Dead Sea. With 3,000 chosen men, the king set out immediately. The journey was hard, the terrain harsh. When Saul needed to relieve himself, he entered a large cave, alone, unaware that deep in its shadows David and some of his men were hiding. "Look," whispered one of David's men, "the Lord has delivered your enemy into your hands. Do to him as seems good to you." David crept forward silently, knife in hand. Saul's back was turned. One quick thrust would end the conflict forever. Instead, David cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Later, even this small act troubled his conscience. "I should not have raised my hand against the Lord's anointed," he told his disappointed men. When Saul left the cave, David followed at a safe distance. Then he called out across the ravine, "My lord, the king!" Saul turned, squinting in the bright sun. There stood David, bowing low, the piece of royal robe held high. "Why do you listen to men who say, 'I seek to harm you'?" David called. "This day your life was in my power in the cave, but I spared you." He held up the cloth. "I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not take your life. Let the Lord judge between us." Something broke in Saul. Then the madness cleared from his eyes like storm clouds parting. "Is that your voice, David, my son?" he called, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You are more righteous than I," Saul admitted. "You have rewarded me with good when I repaid you with evil." For a moment, the old Saul returned, the humble man who had once hidden among the baggage rather than claim his crown. "I know that you shall surely be king," he acknowledged. "But swear to me that you will not cut off my descendants." David gave his oath. The two parted in peace, Saul returning to Gibeah, David remaining in the strongholds of the wilderness. But both men knew the peace was fragile. Though genuine, Saul's moment of clarity would fade. The darkness would return, and with it, the hunt would begin again. The encounter at En-Gedi. The wilderness of En-Gedi stretched like a rumpled blanket along the western shore of the Salt Sea. Cliffs rose sharply from the water, their faces cut with deep wadis and hidden caves. Springs of fresh water created lush oases where date palms and balsam trees thrived. Despite its beauty, this was a land of danger, of sudden flash floods and narrow paths, where a single misstep meant death on the rocks below. It was here that David's band continued to evade Saul, moving like shadows among the caves and ravines. Though their first encounter at En-Gedi had ended in temporary peace, Saul's madness soon returned stronger than before. Once again, the king gathered 3,000 chosen men and set out to hunt David. They made camp near a great rock outcropping known to shepherds as the Hill of the Wild Goats. David sent scouts ahead who returned with news. Saul's army sleeps in the valley below. The king's tent stands in the center, guarded by Abner, the commander. When darkness fell, David turned to Abishai, one of his most trusted men. "Will you come with me?" he asked quietly. The two crept down into Saul's camp. The night was unusually dark, with clouds hiding the moon and stars. Guards who should have been alert dozed at their posts, overcome by a deep sleep sent from the Lord. David and Abishai moved between the sleeping soldiers like ghosts until they reached the king's tent. There lay Saul, his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the rest of his bodyguards slept around him. "God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day," Abishai whispered. "Now, please let me strike him once with the spear right to the earth. I won't need to strike him twice." David looked down at the sleeping king, the man who had welcomed him to the palace years ago, who had given him his daughter in marriage, who had tried to kill him countless times since. For the second time, Saul's life lay in David's hands. "Do not destroy him," David whispered back. "Who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall go out to battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against him." Instead, David took Saul's spear and the water jug that sat near his head. Then they slipped away, as silently as they had come. When they had reached a safe distance, David climbed to the top of a hill opposite the camp. In the early dawn light, he called out, "Abner, will you not answer?" The commander jolted awake. "Who calls to the king?" he demanded. "Are you not a man?" David taunted. "Why then have you not guarded your lord the king? Now see where the king's spear is, and the jug of water that was by his head." Saul recognized David's voice. "Is this your voice, my son David?" he called. "It is my voice, my lord," David replied. "Why does my lord pursue his servant? What have I done?" Once more, Saul's hard heart softened. "I have sinned," he admitted. "Return, my son David. I will harm you no more, because my life was precious in your eyes this day." "Here is the king's spear," David called. "Let one of the young men come over and get it." "May you be blessed, my son David," Saul responded. "You shall both do great things and still prevail." So Saul returned home. But David, knowing the king's changes of heart never lasted, went his way with his men. The wilderness would remain his home, for the peace between them was as fragile as morning mist under the desert sun. Samuel's death. Word spread quickly across the hills and valleys of Israel. Samuel the prophet was dead, the man who had led the nation for decades, who had anointed both Saul and David as kings, had breathed his last breath. People streamed to Ramah from every tribe and town. They came with tears and memories, with stories of how the prophet had touched their lives. All Israel gathered to mourn him, laying his body to rest near the home where he had lived. For Saul, the news hit like a physical blow. Samuel had been his guide, his judge, and sometimes his harshest critic. Though their relationship had fractured years ago, some part of Saul had always hoped for reconciliation. Now, that hope was gone. The last connection to his early days as king, to the time when God's favor had rested on him, had vanished like morning dew. In the hills of the wilderness, David also received the news with profound grief. It was Samuel who had poured oil on his head and whispered the unbelievable words, "The Lord has chosen you to be king over his people." Through years of hiding and hardship, the knowledge that Samuel prayed for him had given David strength. Now, that support was gone. For ordinary Israelites, Samuel's death marked the end of an era. He was the last of the judges, a living link to the time before kings ruled the land. With him died memories stretching back to the days when the ark had still dwelt at Shiloh. In the wake of Samuel's passing, a strange quiet fell over Israel. Border raids from neighboring peoples slowed, as if even enemies paused to acknowledge the great man's death. Saul, seeking to honor Samuel's memory and perhaps ease his own conscience, renewed his efforts to follow the law. He drove out mediums and spiritists from the land, enforcing the old prohibition against those who claimed to speak with the dead. Yet while his public actions spoke of renewed devotion, Saul's private torment only deepened. The voice of God, already silent to him for years, now seemed completely gone. Samuel had been his last tenuous connection to divine guidance. Without that mooring, Saul drifted further into the darkness of his troubled mind. His pursuit of David temporarily forgotten, he sat for long hours on his royal seat, staring at nothing, speaking to no one. The sun rose and set. The moon waxed and waned, and Israel continued without its prophet. A chapter had closed in the nation's story. What would follow remained unwritten, the witch of Endor. Night covered the land like a shroud. Saul wrapped himself in common clothes, leaving his royal garments behind. With only 2 trusted men, he slipped away from the camp where Israel's army had gathered to face the Philistine threat. "Find me a woman who is a medium," he had told his servants earlier that day, desperation edging his voice. When they mentioned one living near Endor, he decided to go under cover of darkness. The Philistine army had assembled at Shunem, their numbers vast. Looking down from Mount Gilboa, Saul felt fear grip his heart like never before. He had sought guidance from the Lord through dreams, through the Urim, through prophets. But heaven remained silent. Samuel was dead. God had turned away. Only forbidden paths remained. The journey to Endor was dangerous, requiring Saul and his companions to circle behind the Philistine camp. One wrong step, one noise, could mean discovery and death. Yet fear drove the king forward. They found the woman's dwelling cut into the side of a hill, light from a small oil lamp flickering through the doorway. When Saul knocked, she opened cautiously, eyeing the three men with suspicion. "Please conduct a séance for me," Saul requested, keeping his face partially hidden. "Bring up for me the one I shall name." The woman hesitated. "Surely you know what Saul has done," she replied, "how he has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die? As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this," Saul swore. "Whom shall I bring up for you?" she asked. "Bring up Samuel." As the woman began her incantations, something unexpected happened. She suddenly screamed, her face draining of color. "Why have you deceived me?" she cried. "You are Saul. Don't be afraid," the king assured her. "What do you see?" "I see a divine being coming up from the earth," she whispered. "What does he look like?" "An old man wrapped in a robe." Saul knew then that Samuel had indeed appeared. He bowed with his face to the ground in reverence. From the shadows came a voice Saul had not heard since before Samuel's death, yet unmistakably his. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" "I am deeply distressed," Saul replied, voice breaking. "The Philistines make war against me. God has departed from me and does not answer me any more. I called you to tell me what to do." Samuel's response held no comfort. "Why do you ask me when the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done what he spoke through me. He has torn the kingdom from your hand and given it to David." The words that followed fell like hammer blows. "Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me, and the Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines." Saul collapsed, strength draining from his body. He had not eaten all day or night, and now the terrible prophecy broke what remained of his will. The medium, seeing his condition, urged him to eat something. She prepared a meal, pressing him until at last he agreed. As Saul ate the woman's bread in the flickering shadows, he knew he was sharing his last meal. Dawn would bring his final battle, and with it the end of all his hopes. The Philistine threat. The land grew tense as word spread among the tribes of Israel. The Philistines were gathering their forces in unprecedented numbers. Their chariots and horsemen filled the coastal plains, their spears catching the sunlight like a forest of metal. This was no mere raid or border skirmish. The Philistines had come to crush Israel once and for all. Saul watched from the heights of Mount Gilboa as enemy camps sprawled across the valley of Jezreel. His weathered face, once handsome and proud, now bore deep lines of worry. Scouts brought reports each hour, each more troubling than the last. The Philistine army had grown larger than anyone had seen before, their weapons more deadly, their warriors more numerous. The king gathered his commanders in his tent as night fell. Lamplight cast long shadows on their grim faces. These men had stood by Saul through decades of warfare, but tonight was different. Fear hung in the air like a heavy mist. The usual strategies and tactics seemed pointless against such overwhelming odds. Outside, the soldiers of Israel prepared for battle with quiet determination. They sharpened swords, checked leather straps on armor, and spoke in hushed tones. Many prayed to the God who had delivered them so often before. But doubt crept through the camp like a chill wind. Their king no longer carried the blessing of the Lord. The prophet Samuel was dead, and David, their greatest warrior, now lived among the very Philistines they faced. Saul's sleep that night came in fitful bursts, haunted by dreams of defeat. He saw his sons fall on the battlefield, his kingdom in ruins, his name forgotten. When dawn broke over the eastern hills, he rose with a heavy heart. The weight of his armor felt impossible, as servants strapped it to his aging body. The armies took their positions as morning mist still clung to the valley. Saul positioned his forces on the slopes of Gilboa, hoping the high ground would give them some advantage. His son Jonathan commanded the right flank, brave as always, showing no fear despite the odds. For a moment, Saul felt a surge of pride watching him. At least in his son, he had not failed. Trumpets sounded across the valley. The earth seemed to tremble as the Philistine army began to advance. Their orderly lines stretched horizon to horizon, the morning sun glinting off helmets and spear tips. Saul clutched the hilt of his sword, knuckles white beneath his battle gloves. A strange calm settled over him, the quiet clarity of a man who sees his end approaching. The Philistines moved steadily forward, their drums beating in rhythm to their march. Archers took position at the front of Israel's forces, drawing their bows with practiced precision. Saul raised his hand, waiting for the enemy to come within range. Every heartbeat seemed to stretch into eternity. His hand dropped. The sky darkened with arrows. The battle for Israel's future had begun, and deep in his heart, Saul knew it would be his last. As the armies clashed below, the king of Israel stood tall on the mountainside, watching as destiny unfolded before him. A destiny he had once embraced with hope, but now faced with only dread. David among the Philistines. Miles away from the gathering storm at Gilboa, David found himself in a precarious position. For over a year, he had lived in Ziklag, a town given to him by Achish, king of Gath. The same Philistines who now marched against his people had become his reluctant protectors. David's band had grown to 600 men, with families and livestock. They lived in an uneasy peace, raiding Israel's enemies to the south while convincing Achish they attacked Israelite settlements. This dangerous game of deception had sustained them, but now everything hung in balance. Achish had summoned David to join the massive Philistine army, gathering for the final assault on Israel. With a heavy heart, David had marched with his men, trapped between impossible choices. To refuse meant certain death at Philistine hands. To fight meant raising his sword against his own people, perhaps against Saul himself. The morning air filled with dust from thousands of marching feet as David and his men took their place in the rear of the Philistine formation. His warriors exchanged troubled glances, their loyalty to David now pulling them toward an unthinkable act, war against their own brothers. Providence came in an unexpected form. The Philistine commanders, upon seeing David and his Hebrews among their ranks, protested to Achish. "Send these men back," they demanded. "They will turn against us in battle to win favor with their master Saul." Their distrust, born of wisdom, became David's salvation. With feigned reluctance but internal relief, David accepted Achish's apology and order to return to Ziklag. As they marched away from the assembling armies, his men's spirits lifted with each step that carried them from the looming conflict. Yet fate held one more twist. Upon returning to Ziklag, after 3 days' journey, they found the town in smoking ruins. The Amalekites, sensing the absence of fighting men, had raided the settlement, taking women, children, and possessions captive. Grief turned quickly to resolve. Consulting the priest Abiathar and the ephod, saved from Nob's destruction, David sought divine guidance. The answer came clear: "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake them and recover all." With tireless determination, David led his band south across harsh terrain. Many men grew so weary they could not continue and remained behind at the brook Besor. But David pressed on with 400, following tracks across the wilderness until they found a dying Egyptian slave abandoned by the raiders. Given food and water, the man recovered enough to guide them to the Amalekite camp. There they found their enemies celebrating with food and drink, unaware of the approaching vengeance. David waited until twilight, then unleashed his forces upon the unsuspecting raiders. The battle lasted from evening until the next day's sunset. When it ended, David had recovered everything, every woman, child, and possession. Not one person had been lost, though the Amalekites lay scattered across the countryside. As they journeyed back to rebuild Ziklag, David remained unaware of the greater battle unfolding to the north, a battle that would forever change his fate and the future of Israel. While he rescued his loved ones, Saul faced his final hours upon Mount Gilboa. The last stand. Dawn broke blood red over Mount Gilboa. Battle cries and the clash of weapons already filled the valley below as Israelite and Philistine forces collided in a deadly embrace. From his position on the heights, Saul could see the tide turning against his army with each passing hour. The Philistines' strategy became clear as morning wore on. Their superior numbers allowed them to press the flanks of Israel's formation, slowly curving around like the horns of a bull. The trap was closing. Saul barked orders to his captains, trying to shore up weakening positions, but the enemy pressed harder with each counter. Archers began targeting Israel's leadership. Arrows filled the air like deadly rain. Saul's shield-bearer worked frantically to protect his king, but the barrage grew more intense. Commanders fell, formations broke. The disciplined retreat Saul had ordered dissolved into pockets of desperate fighting. Jonathan led a bold countercharge, trying to break the Philistine momentum. For a brief shining moment, it seemed he might succeed. His sword flashed in the sunlight as he cut through enemy ranks. Saul watched with pride and terror as his firstborn fought with the courage of 10 men, but the Philistines regrouped. Fresh troops moved forward to meet Jonathan's advance. The king's other sons, Abinadab and Malchishua, rushed to aid their brother. 3 princes of Israel fought side by side as their father watched from the heights, unable to reach them through the churning mass of battle. A messenger arrived, breathless and bleeding. "My lord," he gasped, "the left flank has collapsed. The Philistines circle behind us." Saul nodded grimly. The mountain that had been their advantage now became a trap. They were being surrounded. Fighting reached the slopes of Gilboa itself. Saul drew his sword and led his personal guard into the fray. Though no longer young, the king fought with the strength of desperation. His blade found Philistine flesh again and again. For a moment, his men rallied around him, pushing back the enemy advance. Then came the cry that stopped Saul's heart. Through the chaos of battle, he saw Jonathan fall. An arrow had found the gap between his son's armor plates. Then another, and another. The prince of Israel dropped to one knee, still fighting but surrounded by enemies. Saul screamed his name, fighting to reach him, but the distance was too great, the enemy too many. One by one, Saul watched his sons fall. Jonathan, Abinadab, Malchishua. Each death struck him like a physical blow. The king fought on, but something had broken inside him. His worst fear realized. Saul became reckless, driving deeper into enemy ranks, perhaps seeking his own end. It came in the form of Philistine archers. Their arrows found him despite his armor, piercing his shoulder, his leg, his side. Blood soaked his royal garments. Each step became agony. Still, Saul fought on, refusing to fall, while breath remained in his body. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the battlefield, Israel's first king stood wounded and alone, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen guard. The mountain that had been his last hope now witnessed his final moments. The circle of enemies tightened around him. Saul of Kish, son of Benjamin, anointed of Samuel, faced the end of his reign, Jonathan's death. Among the tumult of battle on Gilboa's bloodied slopes, no sight proved more heartbreaking than the fall of Jonathan. Unlike his father, whose reign had twisted into paranoia and rage, Jonathan remained true to his noble heart until the very end. As Philistine forces pushed up the mountain, Jonathan rallied a small band of loyal warriors around him. His voice carried above the din of combat, steadying nervous men, encouraging the weary. Those who fought beside him that day would later speak of his calm amid chaos, his skill with bow and sword, his refusal to yield ground even as hope faded. When the first arrow struck him, piercing his shoulder, Jonathan barely faltered. He broke off the shaft and continued fighting. The second arrow found his thigh, making him stumble. Still he stood, shield raised, protecting younger soldiers as they fell back to more defensible ground. The third arrow could not be ignored. It struck near his heart, driving deep. Jonathan's knees buckled. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Yet, even falling, he managed one final act of defiance. His bow sang one last time, taking a Philistine commander with him as he collapsed. Around him, his men fought desperately to protect their fallen prince. One by one, they died where they stood, forming a circle of bodies around Jonathan. In his final moments of consciousness, he thought not of glory or kingdom, but of David, his friend, his brother in spirit. A gentle smile crossed his face as darkness claimed him. Word of Jonathan's fall spread quickly through what remained of Israel's army. Men who had fought bravely began to lose heart. If Jonathan, skilled, beloved Jonathan, could fall, what hope remained for any of them? Far away in the Philistine territories, David sat unaware, celebrating the rescue of his family from Amalekite raiders. He could not know that his dearest friend lay cold on a mountainside, or that the man who had hunted him for years fought his final battle. The bonds of loyalty that tied David to both men, friendship to one, complicated duty to the other, would soon be tested by grief. Jonathan's body lay among hundreds of fallen Israelites. As the battle raged on, the prince who might have bridged the gap between Saul's failed reign and David's coming kingdom would never see the nation united. His loyalty to both father and friend remained uncompromised to the end, a rare quality in a world of shifting allegiances. When night fell and battle ceased, scavengers moved across the field. Jackals and vultures claimed what warriors had abandoned. Among the common soldiers and forgotten conscripts lay a prince of Israel, his armor stripped, his weapons taken as trophies. Jonathan, son of Saul, heir to a crumbling throne, remained only in memory and in the heart of a shepherd king yet to claim his crown. In later years, when David ruled from Jerusalem, he would often grow quiet, remembering the friend whose love surpassed that of women. The songs he sang of Jonathan's courage spread throughout the kingdom, ensuring that though the prince never wore a crown, his name would never fade from Israel's memory. Saul's end. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Gilboa's slopes, Saul stood wounded but defiant. Blood soaked his royal tunic from multiple arrow wounds. His sons lay dead, his army scattered. Yet Israel's first king refused to yield. Philistine warriors closed in, recognizing the tall figure despite his battered state. They approached cautiously, hoping to take him alive. What greater trophy than Israel's anointed king? Saul saw their intent in their eyes and made his decision. He would not become a spectacle in Philistine temples, mocked and tortured for their amusement. "Draw your sword," he commanded his armor-bearer, a young man who had remained faithful through the disaster. "Run me through, lest these uncircumcised come and abuse me." The young man trembled, his face pale with fear and reverence. How could he raise a hand against the Lord's anointed? He could not bring himself to strike, even when commanded. Saul understood. With painful effort, he nodded once, accepting the young man's loyalty even in refusal. Then, with remaining strength, Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. The blade that had led Israel to many victories now ended the life of its first king. The armor-bearer watched in horror as his master collapsed. Seeing Saul dead, knowing Israel had fallen, he too fell on his sword, choosing to die beside his king rather than live with defeat. As evening approached, Philistine soldiers moved among the dead, stripping valuable armor and weapons from fallen Israelites. They found Saul's body, recognizable by its height and the remnants of royal garments. News spread quickly through enemy ranks. The king who had troubled them for decades was no more. In a final indignity, they cut off Saul's head as proof of victory. His armor became a trophy to be displayed in the temple of their goddess Ashtoreth. His headless body, along with the bodies of his sons, they hung from the walls of Beth-shan, a public display of Philistine triumph and Israel's humiliation. As night fell on Gilboa, stars appeared above the silent battlefield. No survivors remained to mourn the fallen king. No funeral songs marked his passing. The mountain that had been his last stronghold became his unmarked grave. The kingdom he had built through 40 years of struggle collapsed in a single day. Miles away, survivors brought word to settlements throughout Israel. Women wailed in doorways. Men tore their garments in grief. Whatever Saul's failings in later years, he had been their king, their defender against surrounding nations. His death left them vulnerable, leaderless, afraid. In the darkness of that night, few could see hope for Israel's future. The throne stood empty, the army destroyed, the Philistines triumphant. Yet unknown to them, a new chapter prepared to unfold, one centered on the outlaw they had rejected, the shepherd warrior their king had hunted. David would soon learn of Saul's fate, and his response would reveal the true nature of the man chosen to lead Israel into its golden age. The aftermath. 3 days passed after the disaster at Mount Gilboa. The Philistines moved through Israel's northern territories unopposed, claiming towns and villages, establishing garrisons to cement their victory. At Beth-shan, the bodies of Saul and his sons remained displayed on the city walls, decomposing in the sun, a brutal reminder of Israel's defeat. Across the Jordan River, in the town of Jabesh-Gilead, elders gathered and whispered counsel. This settlement held a special debt to Saul. Decades earlier, when they faced destruction from the Ammonites, Saul had led his first military campaign to rescue them. That memory remained strong among their elders. "We cannot leave him there," one great warrior insisted. "Not after what he did for us." Under cover of darkness, the bravest men of Jabesh-Gilead crossed the river. They traveled all night, avoiding Philistine patrols, carrying only weapons for defense and tools for their grim task. Reaching Beth-shan before dawn, they moved silently to the city walls. The Philistine guards, celebrating their victory with wine, had grown careless. The men of Jabesh-Gilead scaled the walls undetected and carefully removed the bodies of Saul and his 3 sons. Dawn found them hurrying back across the Jordan with their solemn burden. In Jabesh, they prepared the bodies according to their customs. The decayed flesh they burned respectfully, but they gathered the bones for proper burial beneath a tamarisk tree in their town. Then they fasted 7 days in mourning for the fallen king who had once been their savior. This small act of loyalty amid national catastrophe would not be forgotten. Years later, when David established his kingdom, he would specially bless the people of Jabesh-Gilead for their courage in honoring Saul's remains. Elsewhere in Israel, chaos reigned. Some settlements surrendered to Philistine rule, others prepared for resistance. In Mahanaim, east of the Jordan, Saul's surviving son, Ish-bosheth, gathered loyalists around him. Backed by Saul's cousin and General Abner, he claimed his father's throne, though he controlled only fragments of what had once been a united kingdom. The tribes found themselves divided once more, some supporting Ish-bosheth as Saul's heir, others looking south toward Judah, where rumors spread that David had returned to his homeland. The unity that had defined Israel under Saul's early reign shattered into regional loyalties and clan politics. Philistine commanders established control over key towns and trade routes, content to let internal divisions weaken Israel further. They collected tribute from frightened settlements, installed puppet officials, and believed their victory complete. Yet, even in defeat, seeds of Israel's recovery took root. Survivors from Saul's army melted into the hills, forming resistance bands. Weapons were hidden away, rather than surrendered. From village synagogues throughout the land, prayers ascended heavenward, pleading with God to remember his chosen people. Meanwhile, far southward in the town of Ziklag, David was about to receive news that would alter the course of everything. A messenger made his appearance, his clothing ripped apart, his head covered in dust, both unmistakable symbols of deep mourning. The man dropped to his knees in David's presence and delivered words that would close one chapter of history while opening another entirely. Saul has fallen, along with Jonathan. Israel's mighty army lies defeated. The throne of Israel now stood vacant, awaiting whoever would step forward to claim it. Although the battlefields had grown quiet, the battle for Israel's destiny was just getting started. Rising from the ruins of this crushing defeat, a new kingdom was destined to emerge, one fundamentally different from everything Saul had established. Still, it would continue carrying forward that ancient promise spoken to the descendants of Abraham so long ago. David's Song of Sorrow. 2 days following the battle's conclusion, a young Amalekite came stumbling into David's encampment at Ziklag. His garments were torn to shreds, ashes smeared across his head as he collapsed at David's feet, bringing devastating reports. Both Saul and Jonathan had perished. Israel's military forces were now scattered and thoroughly defeated. David's followers observed their commander with careful attention, wondering how this particular news would affect him. Through all these years, Saul had pursued David relentlessly, treating him like prey to be hunted down. With Saul's death, the single greatest danger threatening David's existence had been eliminated. However, rather than witnessing any form of jubilation, they saw something they never anticipated. David seized hold of his own clothing and violently ripped them apart in an overwhelming display of anguish. His commanders immediately did the same, the distinct sound of tearing fabric echoing through the sudden stillness. What followed next were deep, raw expressions of grief, guttural wailing that persisted straight through until nightfall. Not a single morsel of food touched their mouths throughout that entire day. They mourned deeply for Saul, for Jonathan, for every warrior of Israel who had fallen. The messenger stood there awkwardly, shifting his weight, possibly anticipating some form of compensation for delivering word of Saul's demise. His account claimed he had discovered the king already wounded upon Mount Gilboa, and that Saul himself had requested the messenger finish what had been started. As evidence of his story, he produced both Saul's royal crown and the armband he wore. David's reaction caught absolutely everyone off guard. Rather than offering gratitude, his eyes turned cold with fury. How could you not fear lifting your own hand against the one anointed by the Lord himself? That question lingered in the atmosphere, like a blade ready to strike. Before the young man could manage any kind of stammering response, David commanded his immediate execution. The individual, claiming responsibility for ending Saul's life, fell lifeless by David's order. Throughout the days that came after, David frequently withdrew into solitude. During these isolated periods, something truly extraordinary took shape. A lamentation song emerged, so achingly beautiful, so profoundly moving that it would be passed down and taught to countless generations of Israelites to follow. This composition, which became known as the Song of the Bow, flowed forth from David's heart, a heart shattered by grief. The glory of Israel now lies fallen upon the high places. Witness how the mighty warriors have been brought low. Within this lament, not even the slightest reference appeared to their troubled past, no acknowledgement whatsoever of Saul's consuming jealousy or his numerous attempts to take David's life. On the contrary, it offered praise for both Saul and Jonathan, using remarkably generous language. Saul, together with Jonathan, cherished and admirable throughout their lives, remain united even in their deaths. In speed, they surpassed eagles. In strength, they exceeded lions. For Jonathan specifically, David reserved his most heartfelt and tender expressions. "My heart breaks for you, Jonathan, my brother. The pleasure of your companionship has meant everything to me. The love you showed me was something beyond ordinary, exceeding even the love that comes from women." The song concluded with a sorrowful, repeated refrain. How completely the mighty have fallen, and how utterly the instruments of warfare have been destroyed. David gave orders for this lamentation to be taught throughout all of Judah. Through marketplaces and within homes, on hillsides where shepherds kept watch over their flocks, the song began spreading everywhere. People who had lived in fear of Saul during those dark concluding years of his reign now remembered different things instead. His early displays of bravery, his commanding and impressive physical presence, his triumphs achieved against Israel's adversaries. Through this single action, David revealed the true nature of his character. Despite spending years living as a hunted refugee, He chose to honor the position Saul had occupied. Whatever personal grievances might have existed between the two of them, David outright refused to take any pleasure in witnessing the death of God's appointed king. This particular decision spoke volumes about the character of the man who would shortly be wearing Israel's crown himself. During an era when those who emerged victorious typically spoke curses over the memories of defeated rivals, David deliberately chose a path of respect and dignity. This generosity embedded deep within his spirit would eventually become a defining characteristic of how he ruled, earning him devotion and loyalty far beyond anything that could ever be achieved through force or intimidation alone. The Song of the Bow successfully preserved the legacy of both Saul and Jonathan with appropriate dignity. Through the words David crafted, they remained remembered as heroes instead of as failures. Mighty warriors, truly deserving of being remembered. Through his genuine grief, David was actually establishing the groundwork for healing Israel's deep wounds and eventually reuniting its separated tribes. The political consequences. Saul's death created an enormous vacuum of power that posed a serious threat of ripping Israel completely apart. 7 days following the moment news arrived in the southern territories, David turned to seek guidance from the divine. "Should I travel up to one of the cities belonging to Judah?" he inquired through Abiathar the priest. The response arrived with clarity. "Make your way up to Hebron." Therefore David made the journey northward, bringing along both of his wives, his men of war, along with all their families. The tribal elders of Judah, which was his own tribe, received him warmly in Hebron. In that place they anointed him as king, though his rule extended only over Judah. The tribes located in the north remained at a distance, maintaining their loyalty to the memory of Saul and to his son, who still lived across the Jordan River in the city called Mahanaim. Abner, who was Saul's cousin and commanded his military forces, began making his strategic moves. He took Ishbosheth, the surviving son of Saul, and declared him king over all the remaining tribes. Despite lacking both his father's impressive stature and his capabilities, Ishbosheth became essentially a figurehead, someone behind whom Abner could continue maintaining his own authority and power. Israel found itself with two separate kings, two divided kingdoms, and mounting tension rising between them. That unity which Samuel had cautioned might disappear under monarchical rule had indeed shattered, not because of foreign invasion, but rather due to internal fracturing. For the span of 2 years, an unstable peace managed to hold. David worked on consolidating his power throughout the south, governing with wisdom from Hebron. Word of his just rule began to spread. Refugees fleeing from northern territories started showing up in Judah, searching for stability. Several of Saul's previous officers quietly began transferring their allegiance to David, recognizing in him the more capable leader. Meanwhile, Abner remained busy, working to reinforce Ishbosheth's claim to the throne. He placed commanders he trusted in strategically important northern cities while maintaining rigid control over his puppet monarch. However, Ishbosheth simply did not possess his father's courage or his natural charisma. Murmurs circulated suggesting that the wrong son of Saul had managed to survive what happened on Mount Gilboa. The underlying tension eventually exploded into outright warfare. Joab, who commanded David's military, encountered Abner's forces at the Pool of Gibeon. What started as a limited contest involving 12 warriors, representing each side, quickly degenerated into complete battle. Abner's troops fell back in retreat, with Joab's soldiers in hot pursuit. While this chase was underway, Abner ended up killing Asahel, who was Joab's brother, but only after repeatedly warning the younger warrior to break off and turn away. This single death sowed seeds of an intensely bitter vendetta that would ultimately result in Abner's assassination and would significantly complicate David's journey toward unified leadership. As the months continued passing, Ishbosheth's standing grew increasingly precarious. Scripture simply records it this way. David continued growing stronger and stronger, whereas the house of Saul continued growing weaker and weaker. Recognizing the unavoidable conclusion, Abner initiated secret discussions with David, proposing to deliver the northern tribes under David's authority. Before this strategy could reach completion, Joab assassinated Abner while he attended a peace gathering, taking revenge for his brother's death. David responded by publicly condemning this action and providing Abner with an official state funeral, purposely distancing himself from the murder. Nevertheless, the harm had been inflicted. The northern tribes regarded the killing with deep suspicion, questioning whether David had secretly given the order himself. Ishbosheth, now left completely without Abner's protection, soon became the victim of assassins who hoped to gain David's favor. They carried his severed head to Hebron, fully expecting a reward. Instead, just like what happened to the Amalekite, who had claimed responsibility for killing Saul, they faced immediate execution for murdering an innocent person inside his own house while he lay on his bed. Throughout these turbulent and chaotic years, David navigated an extremely delicate path. He administered punishment to those who launched attacks against Saul's family, yet he gradually absorbed their base of power. He openly mourned the deaths of his previous enemies, yet simultaneously gained advantages from their elimination. He publicly honored the house of Saul, all while working through diplomatic channels to bring their reign to an end. 7 full years elapsed before every tribe finally came together under David's unified rule. The political aftermath following Saul's death turned out to be every bit as complicated and violent as his reign had been. However, emerging from all this disorder came a united kingdom that was actually stronger than it had been previously, now prepared for its golden age under the shepherd king who came from Bethlehem. Underneath all the political upheaval that followed Saul's demise lay questions of greater depth. What spiritual teachings could Israel extract from the tragedy of their inaugural king? How ought they to comprehend God's involvement in both Saul's ascent and his ultimate downfall? These questions deeply troubled both priests and prophets as they attempted to provide guidance for a nation left shaken. Saul's entire life embodied a striking paradox. Selected by God himself, he had started out with authentic humility, actually hiding himself among the baggage when the call to kingship arrived. God's Spirit descended upon him with tremendous power during those initial days. He prophesied alongside other prophets, guided Israel to significant military triumphs, and displayed genuine moments of true nobility. Yet somehow, something fundamental had fractured inside him. His impatience drove him to perform an unauthorized sacrifice at Gilgal. His pride provided fuel for disobedience concerning the Amalekites. His jealousy directed toward David warped his capacity for sound judgment. By the time his final years arrived, this king, who had once prophesied while filled with God's Spirit, found himself consulting a medium at Endor, committing an act explicitly forbidden by the very law he was supposed to be upholding. Those scribes tasked with recording Israel's history recognized within Saul's story a stark warning regarding the human heart's potential for destroying itself. His tragedy did not stem from insufficient opportunity or from God's abandonment, but rather from his own series of choices that progressively separated him from God's presence and from his intended purpose. Throughout settlements everywhere, priests delivered teachings emphasizing that even someone anointed by God could experience a fall through acts of disobedience. No position, regardless of how elevated or exalted, could place anyone beyond the fundamental requirement of remaining faithfully obedient. This crucial lesson would continue resonating throughout Israel's entire history, serving as a challenge to future kings to keep Saul's fate clearly in their memories. However, alongside this stern warning, something unexpected began developing, a sense of compassion directed towards Saul's struggles. David's lament had established the tone early on, choosing to honor the fallen king despite everything bitter that had transpired between them. This particular perspective acknowledged the complex nature of human beings, the enormous difficulty inherent in leadership, all those crushing pressures that had rested squarely on Saul's shoulders. During quiet conversations gathered around evening fires, Israelites discussed how Samuel had anointed Saul, only to later publicly shame and humiliate him. They examined the relentless burden of continuous warfare, the profound isolation that accompanies kingship, the overwhelming weight of divine expectations suddenly placed upon a man pulled from complete obscurity to guide an entire nation. Some individuals even began wondering whether Saul's most critical failure had actually been one of timing instead of character, essentially the wrong individual for that specific moment within Israel's journey. Perhaps he had found himself caught between the disappearing era of the judges and the newly emerging age of monarchy, never truly fitting into either world completely. As David worked to establish his reign firmly, he appeared absolutely determined to absorb lessons from Saul's mistakes. Where Saul had increasingly grown distant from spiritual counsel, David deliberately kept prophets. Nathan and Gad positioned close as his personal advisors. Where Saul had allowed worship to be neglected, David made the Ark of the Covenant absolutely central to the life of the nation. Where Saul had permitted jealousy to fester and grow, David demonstrated extraordinary forgiveness directed toward his enemies. Yet even David himself would eventually come to discover that same truth which had ultimately destroyed Saul. No king whatsoever, regardless of how deeply beloved by God, stands protected from temptation's powerful pull or receives exemption from the demands of obedience. The lesson contained within Saul's life would turn out to be relevant even for Israel's single greatest ruler. Perhaps the most significant spiritual legacy Saul left behind was this. He became the contrasting figure that served to highlight David's virtues all the more clearly. Without enduring Saul's persecution, David might never have cultivated the resilience, the wisdom, and that dependence upon God which came to define his entire kingship. Without witnessing Saul's failures directly, Israel might never have gained full appreciation for David's faithfulness. With the passage of time, Saul's name gradually disappeared from everyday conversation. No magnificent temple or monument was erected to preserve his memory. His spiritual legacy survived not through any achievements, but rather through the cautionary tale his life became. His existence served as an ongoing reminder that responding to God's calling demands not merely initial obedience, but rather faithfulness, maintained throughout one's entire lifetime. The teachings drawn from Saul. As years continued passing and David's reign delivered unprecedented levels of prosperity to Israel, the memory of Saul became increasingly remote. Children brought into the world after Mount Gilboa knew him exclusively through songs passed down and stories told. Nevertheless, the teachings derived from his stormy life continued remaining relevant for every generation that came afterward. Saul's complete journey from total obscurity to the throne, and finally to his tragic ending, provided wisdom applicable to anyone who held positions of power or influence. His story continued, whispering warnings that kept echoing throughout Israel's history, addressing kings, priests, and everyday common people equally. The initial lesson emerged from how Saul's story began. Greatness frequently arises from places nobody expects. This tall, physically attractive son of Kish had never been searching for the throne. He had simply been out looking for donkeys that had wandered off when Samuel located him. His early reluctance and his humility had both been completely genuine, his initial successes quite substantial. This served to remind later generations that potential leaders could very well be discovered working in fields or inside workshops rather than residing in palaces or serving in temples. However, Saul also provided a demonstration of how rapidly power has the capacity to transform a person. That humble individual who once concealed himself among the baggage eventually went on to construct a monument dedicated to himself at Carmel. The king, who initially began by actively seeking divine guidance, eventually became too impatient to wait for God's timing. Initial character, no matter how promising it appears, needed constant cultivation to prevent its corruption. Perhaps the most agonizing lesson emerging from Saul's time as king involved understanding how incremental acts of disobedience ultimately led to complete spiritual disaster. No single isolated moment can be identified as marking Saul's fall from divine favor. Instead, a pattern gradually took shape. Small compromises here and there, minor justifications offered, slight departures from the instructions Samuel had provided. Each one appeared reasonable when viewed in isolation. Each one served to open the door slightly wider toward greater deviations, until Saul finally discovered himself consulting a medium, crossing a boundary he never would have even contemplated during his early years. This gradual process of decline delivered a warning to future leaders concerning the very real danger posed by small compromises. Minor disobedience rarely stays minor for long. What starts out as merely bending rules frequently ends with breaking them entirely. Saul's relationship with David served to illustrate another truth of crucial importance. Insecurity possesses the power to destroy effective leadership. Despite all of David's loyalty and his dedicated service, Saul proved incapable of celebrating the young man's accomplishments. Instead, he interpreted David's rise as representing his own decline. This deep insecurity poisoned what could potentially have been an extremely powerful partnership, ultimately costing Israel multiple decades of potential stability. The tragedy grew even deeper because Saul occasionally managed to recognize his own errors. Following the incident when David chose to spare his life at En-Gedi, Saul wept quite openly, freely acknowledging David's righteousness. However, these brief moments of clarity never managed to endure. Proving unable to sustain genuine repentance or permanently alter his direction, Saul kept returning to those same destructive patterns despite possessing full knowledge that he should do better. His ongoing struggle resonated deeply with ordinary people, who also frequently found themselves repeating mistakes they genuinely wished they could avoid. Saul's failures were neither monstrous nor alien in nature. They simply reflected common human weaknesses, but magnified significantly by power combined with pressure. Jonathan's story, forever intertwined with his father's, presented a counterpoint. Though remaining loyal to Saul, Jonathan clearly recognized David's divine calling and actively supported it despite the personal cost involved. His demonstrated ability to place God's purposes ahead of family loyalty or personal ambition created a stark contrast to his father's desperate attempts to maintain his grip on power. In centuries that came later, when Israel's kingdom experienced division and then faltered, prophets would look backward to Saul as clear evidence that external success, meaning military victories, territorial expansion, accumulated wealth, meant absolutely nothing without internal righteousness present. A king could potentially win battles, yet still lose his own soul. Might succeed in extending borders while simultaneously watching his heart drift further away from God. Perhaps the most hopeful lesson that emerged from Saul's tragic life appeared in observing how God continued working even through human failure. Despite all of Saul's mistakes, the divine plan kept unfolding without interruption. David's years spent living as a fugitive actually prepared him for kingship in ways that palace life never possibly could have accomplished. Israel's collective experiences under Saul's rule helped them develop a much fuller appreciation for David's style of leadership. This revealed a profound truth regarding divine sovereignty. Human failures ultimately cannot derail God's purposes. The messianic line that would eventually lead to Jesus passed directly through David, not through Saul. Yet Saul's reign still proved to be necessary preparation for David's subsequent success. Even within tragedy, God's redemptive work never ceased. As shadows continued lengthening across Israel's golden age and fresh challenges kept emerging, that cautionary tale of their inaugural king served to remind each successive generation to carefully guard their hearts, to obey completely, to embrace genuine humility, and to place their trust in God's perfect timing. lessons that remained every bit as relevant, echoing through the bustling streets of Jerusalem as they had been on those blood-soaked slopes of Mount Gilboa.